Right, this is going to be another episode of Counterpoints. It is obviously just the two of us because we are sparing with when we bring on our guests. We want to make it feel, here's the thing, Maniac, if you just entertain people all the time, then what does it mean? You know, you're just part of a rotation. We want it to feel special, like we extend that invitation, we bring them in, we set them up, we listen to them, the joke being there. I don't listen to them, I just interrupt them all the time, apparently. But spoiler, one, that is my style. And two, they all know it. They're all my friends. They all know me. Like they know when they're going to get in and when they're going to get their points. And there's actually a secret third detail, Maniac, that people don't know, which is, if I do that, I actually do it in a way where it's like, if the other person really had their point and they're like, oh, so let me, I would obviously just go, yeah, go ahead, etc. Like, there's a politeness element, but it's all right. I understand the soap opera element. People, for some reason, are like fans of the show, but then they're also watching, like, vote Thorin off the island. Like, they think they can just bring, like, someone else. Like, they actually do that, believe it or not, Maniac, on that Feed the Trolls one I do with Tech Girl, where if you know anything about the industry, it's really obvious. I obviously, like, set that show up with her, and it was, like, you know, partly my idea and stuff. But they don't get that, so they keep putting in the comments, like, oh, are you going to have any guests that aren't Thorin, though? It's like, the whole point is sort of, it's the Tech Girl and Thorin podcast, guys. So it's all right. You'll learn the way this industry works eventually, boys and girls. You will learn.
It's
eventually.
Okay. Let them entertain the idea, right? You
entertain.
You dangle it like, oh no, they're gonna remove me. Please don't.
Oh, I should do that. It's like, as a meme, that would actually be epic, wouldn't it? Like, before April Fools or something, if I did like a thing where I pretend, like at the end of the episode, I should have heard you tell me, like, you know what? I'm getting sick of your attitude on these episodes, you know.
Exactly.
Maybe this is the last one we do, and then the next one, you know, it starts with someone else, and then the joke is I just appear as a box like 5 minutes in, you know, like wrestling style.
Exactly. There's something to be done. Yeah, exactly. Just,
right. Speaking of replacing people, though, Maniac, even though it hasn't gone super crazy, we obviously had a mini ROSTERMANIA in this off-season period. And one of the big teams, in fact, currently, the interesting thing about this one is a bit like G2. I notice there's a weird meta now where instead of bundling all the announcements together, people are doing it piecemeal on these teams, which I actually think in some ways is worse because it actually allows you to speculate in a way where you can set like negative expectations. So the obvious example initially would be G2, because if you think about it, right, if they'd have just done it all in one post, Maniac, if the post went like this, Nexa and Huxley are out of the team, but we're bringing in Snacks and Malbs, and NiKo isn't going to be IGL. If you do it all at once, I feel like people would be a little bit overwhelmed, but they'd take it on board, they'd figure it out. And the key thing is they wouldn't be misled. Whereas I feel like what's actually wrecked G2 is they've almost done anti-marketing, Maniac. The way they've announced it was like, we're getting rid of Nexa and we're getting Malbs. Everyone's like, brilliant, oh, great, up-and-coming player. You could do a lot with him. Hey, and then everyone also was thinking, maybe NiKo's IGL. So if he IGLs, maybe you can set Malbs up. And suddenly, yeah, this is good. And then you go, we're taking Huxley out. And everyone's like, this is what we wanted. Like, isn't this the team? They're going to win the major. And then all of a sudden, and Snacks. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, if you'd have led with Snacks, no one would have this hype, would they? In fact, everyone would probably be flaming you. So there's that aspect. But I actually think Liquid's doing the same thing, because obviously Liquid's done it as well. They're like, we're selling skulls and kicking Cadian. Well, they're benching, but we all know what that means, kicking. It's a delayed kicking. So we're kicking Cadian. And then all we know now at the moment is, technically, Maniac, you have to be precise in it. Technically, they've just registered JKS to play at Blast Groups, but in history, that usually means he's also joining, and that's just the way you're setting it up, etc. But obviously, at the moment, technically, no one knows who was the coach, because suppose he kicked Zeus, and then in theory, no one knows who the fifth person is. And remember, since the implication is Twistzz goes IGL, actually the joke of all is, whereas we all assumed NiKo goes IGL and then whoever they bring in is just a rifle, it actually is going to be like that in Liquid. And apparently the rifle, the rumour is, and what I've heard it's plausible, is it's this player Ultimate who's sort of like an unknown NA player, at least to us, is the point. So, yeah, I actually think, what do you think overall of these moves? Let's just start maybe with the first one. What do you think of JKS being added? You like that move?
So, it's funny because I think there was a very, very short list of players for whom this would have been a win-win to join Liquid. And I think JKS is probably on that very short list. Now, this is the way I look at it, because you know that there are definite selling arguments in Liquid. And I think Twistzz and NAF are two reasons that are extremely enticing enough to consider an option. But at the same time, as a player, I think with what has happened to the Cadian Skulls sort of scenario, you might have a little bit of apprehension, thinking like, do I want to join this team? Like, maybe they don't exactly know what they want to do. Do I trust Twistzz to be an IGL? Do I even know who's going to be my IGL? So if you'd really asked for some top dogs type players profile, they might have just not accepted it. Like, just say, listen, I don't think this is good for me. I don't think this is going to go anywhere. But in the case of JKS, for him, this might just be the best offer he would get. Like, I think at this point, I think his credit has kind of disappeared and faded away just a little bit over time. We know in Counter-Strike, the shelf life of your reputation is only so long. So in this instance, I think for him, It's a great opportunity to come back to the top level of Counter-Strike. And for Liquid, considering that they're removing skulls, and if you're doing like sort of the comparison of the profiles, that's a match. That's a plug and play immediately. You can just put him in the position of Skulls. You know he's going to have way more experience to deal with some of these positions, because we know Skulls at times had a little bit of nerves and how they handle these moments. Like the anchor is a very specific role in Counter-Strike. So the only question that I have is the current level of JKS. Like, how much Counter-Strike have you played recently? What is your mechanical ability right now, this very day? If it is sufficient, and I believe that he's had the rigor to practice and make sure that he's got the level up to a T. If that's the case, personally, I think it's a win-win. I think both parties might be very satisfied with that. And you also have to consider like a financial angle to it. I don't imagine Liquid had to pay a whole lot. I think JKS was pretty much out of contract. I think
he was listed as a free agent, I believe. So
yeah,
probably
exactly.
no buyout.
You imagine you're Liquid. Sure, there might have been some other names in terms of anchors out there that you might have considered. I don't know.
This is the cheapest, or surely,
like,
right?
Exactly, like Perfecto, Kisserado, whatever the hell. Sure, yeah, these are all very decent names, but you would have to pay a buyout, arguably.
Yes.
And in terms of finances, I think JKS makes a lot of sense. So personally, I think it's great. I think both parties are probably happy with this coming together, and I kind of think it's more long-term than just for the Blast event, but this is pure speculation.
No, I actually agree with you. The reason I started with that one is I actually think this is a slam dunk for all parties. Like, first of all, on the last detail you said there, like, will his mechanical level be good? Essentially, will he be good after like a layoff? Like, will he have ring rust? I actually do think, Maniac, this is one of those players, a bit like Dexter. It's like, well, I don't really worry about that. Like, first of all, JKS has times, multiple times that way he wasn't in teams. Obviously, he had that period where he stepped in for FaZe. Then he had to wait a while to get into G2. This guy first of all, I've heard behind the scenes he has a good work ethic. It seems like a guy who just puts his hours in. And then also, I've always thought about his game. His game's pretty consistent anyway, actually. Like, one of the things I like about JKS is it's why I couldn't really understand the G2 kick. It's why I do think the reason they said Nexa was for vibes is it's just an implication they didn't like JKS for some reason, like on some personal level, by the way, not player-wise. Because I've always also thought, like, I mean, the joke is G2 right now needs a fucking anchor. They don't have one in the team. Like, this guy is sort of a specialist, but if you're going to recruit him as a specialist and not as like your main star, he's really good. Like, to me, he just slots right into this team. Even when people think on the T side, right? Obviously, traditionally, he's more of a lurker, right? People might think like, oh, is it going to be a clash with NAF? I hope people understand this concept, because we already had this happen when Electronic joined... what was it? When he joined Cloud9, people were like, well, look at the rollover. It's like, yes, but remember, guys, when you lurk, it's not really like one role and he always is at the back. It's more like you just play the outskirts. Well, there's two outskirts to a map usually. Like, you can have two players at that. Like, if people think the most classic overlap that the people think failed is Stown and Blame F, but I have a reason as to why I think that failed. That has nothing to do with being the lurker. It's this. I think the role overlap went like this. It wasn't that they both wanted to be a lurker or something. I think it's that they both wanted to be the lurker who makes like the secondary call or has like the input in the mid round. And Blame F was literally the IGL, and Stown, they made it quite clear they're going to do something different when device it. So it just implies to me maybe it's just that Stown he sort of was like lurking, but he didn't get to come much, or he wasn't part of the action, or he felt excluded or something. I think in this team you can make it work. And also, if the two people we're talking about, JKS and NAF, those are two players I would tell you I think are very easy to work with and will sort of make space for each other. You know, they're not the big egos who demand everything of themselves, and you kind of know what they're both good at. So I actually just think that this move is a bag. It's the other ones I'm more skeptical about. The other ones look like the budget moves. How about you, Maniac? By the way, even though JKS is a big name, all of these look like budget moves to me. Like, literally. As in, if I imagine the board they had with all the list of names, Maniac, like, maybe JKS was higher up, because, as you said, the buyout aspect basically makes him, like, almost undervalued. Like, he's actually very cheap right now. But the others, like the ultimate player, I mean, I've barely heard of this player, so that's a bad sign already. That implies to me, like, a lot of people said no or just aren't available right now. And then the coach one I didn't even mention. Instead of Zeus, they're bringing in Myth R, who people might remember most famously, I would say, from North. He was also in a bunch of other teams. He coached Mouse for a while, etc., in the online era, not with Carrigan and that. So the reason why I bring that up as well is this isn't really like a massive name coach. In fact, this is one of the ones where I always thought it was a bit telling that he only got as high as North. This isn't a guy who was like given the big Astralis gig or something, or like people got to bring him in. Like, so that looks to me like you just had to go with budget options. You have to look for people who both are available right now, hopefully without like a buyout or something, and then also you save on the buyout, so we're not spending $500,000 again. And then also you just wanted people who are cheap. And by the way, I think it might even be implied with those two people. I don't know about coach, but especially the ultimate player, that might even be a stopgap. You know what I mean, Maniac? That might even be. I'll share this in. How I see it is like this. I think this is actually a symptom of the Twistzz getting to become IGL move, which is that I think it would be a massive mistake when you've spent all the money on the previous roster to basically double down, spend like another million and a half, get all big names. Like imagine they did what the fans want, Maniac. They get like Perfecto and fucking, you know, like big names. They get some big fucking names coming in the door. The problem then is, if Twistzz doesn't end up being a good IGL and doesn't appreciate the role, you've sort of wasted that cash, and you're going to do a rebuild afterwards anyway. So in a cynical way, I almost feel like it's not that bad to like remove a bit of pressure and give Twistzz a chance to IGL, and then you can always just exit out of it later and make him a star.
Yeah, I agree with you on the financial standpoint. Why would you risk so much when you're not exactly sure of the result? But I have also another angle to this, which is if you're going to trust Twistzz to establish his Counter-Strike, which technically we don't exactly know how he wants to play.
No idea.
You could assume it would be something that's close to FaZe, because this was the more success he's ever had as a player.
And he was very complimentary of the IGL as well.
Exactly. So my point is, maybe in his shoes, it was a good idea. It was comfortable to bring in people who would have lesser of an influence and an established name, so he wouldn't have to fight them off to create his Counter-Strike. Right? Let's just imagine you bring in, we're going to go in the realm of hypothesis. You bring in Zonic and you bring in Perfecto, and they all come in and say, listen, hey, this is the Counter-Strike we should play, bro. Like, listen, this is how we should do it. This is how we should do it. And you're Twistzz and you're trying to figure out, these are my first steps as an IGL. Maybe he first wants to establish, this is how I want to play the game. And at that game, I want people to help me out. You mentioned JKS, NAF. I don't think they're going to be hard people to play with. I think they're agreeable people. They'll make it work. They're compromising. They'll help you build that out. So when you bring in Mither and you bring in this Polish player Ultimate, which I have seen here and there, I probably witnessed like 2 games of him. That's it. So my opinion is very limited. But what you make sure of is that you are going to be dominant in like the conversations that are going to be had in terms of CS. And maybe that's what Twistzz was looking for, to kind of, again, build a foundation of his stint as an IGL in Liquid. And if it turns out that it works out well, and he's got actually a knack for it, then you can start to upgrade the pieces, and he's going to have sort of a legitimacy in his leading before some bigger profiles come in. That could be a way to look at it too.
Oh yeah, by the way, Maniac is right. I said NA earlier. He's actually a Polish player.
He's a Polish player,
not as famous Polish player from the scene. If people thought he was on big, but just not the famous one, obviously. What was that I was going to say? Oh, there's one more detail I forgot on JKS. I actually think you also nailed it at the beginning. The reason why for JKS, this is basically like, here's the analogy, Maniac. It's like what he did was he tried to like, what would you say in this scenario? It's like he was holding for a better offer. And eventually there will become a diminishing returns point where if you wait too long, the offer will get worse and worse and worse. And you'll have to actually take a very bad offer. But you don't sometimes take the first offer in case there's a better one coming. So basically, here's what I've heard about the transfer scene. The problem I've heard JKS had was the kinds of teams that did want him were the sort of fanatics and NIPs of the world. But the problem is, at the time, because he's coming out of G2, and by the way, he also had the success of winning Katowice with FaZe, in his mind, I mean, he's quite old in his career, if people don't know. He doesn't want to like grind up again. He wanted to get a good squad. So I'm sure he was hoping for a comparable team, like a Vitality or someone to come and face one of these teams to potentially, if they made a move, come and pick him up. And it wasn't going to happen, basically. And so I've heard basically it's on his side that he didn't want to do like a Fnatic / an NIP move. So if you actually look at it, bearing in mind no one could have predicted the Liquid thing would just suddenly appear like this out of nowhere, and he potentially hasn't got the buyout. I think actually this is the right move for both people. Like if you wait this long, mate, you weren't going to get a bigger deal, and the more time you wait, the more you're being forgotten about, and people aren't even remembering. You'll get in a Forest territory eventually, where even if you're good enough, people just won't be considering you as one of the names in the mix. So I think there's that aspect. And then here's a little juicy one for you. I'll give you this just to give a tiny bit of hype that Twistzz IGL might actually work, because everyone's going to think because it's Liquid, it's like when Yekindar did it, right? But first of all, I actually think Yekindar himself, I've heard he actually was a bit humbled by that experience, believe it or not. I heard actually he did realize when he did it, sort of like a lot of people who, by the way, the secondary callers do. The ones that are honest, Valde, mate of mine, calls it. Eventually they do come for Alu. They'll come forwards after years later and go, okay, I get it. Actually, it is easy to be the secondary caller compared to the main caller. It sucks to be the main caller when you have a hard match and your playbook breaks. All the things that everyone who's done IGL knows, but players have to go through the experience. The reason why this isn't exactly like the Yekindar one, and this is a tiny little sexy nugget. Are you ready? No one, by the way, I haven't heard this on a single show from anyone, so you're going to love this one, is when Twistzz was coming to leave FaZe Clan, remember he had all those options. One, he could obviously have stayed in FaZe. They were a successful team. They liked him. Two, he could have gone to Vitality, which at the time was the number one team. He could have gone and just won. He instead chose option 3, which was go back to Liquid and rebuild. You know, like I said, for me, it's like what you're doing there is you're almost gambling on individual legacy. It's like, I don't just want to be part of great teams because then everyone will say, you know, Rops and ZywOo won me everything. I want to be also one of the stars. I want to win, which, by the way, really cool narrative. I really appreciate players with ambition like that. But here's a cool detail. I've heard one of the reasons they were also considering maybe he stays in FaZe is fucking fire, which is since he was the guy who aligned with Kerrigan's style and clearly spent a lot of time like trying to understand it and his role within it, and he thought it was one of the best approaches to international Counter-Strike. I've heard that it was on the cards, maybe in the future, one day Kerrigan becomes the coach and Twistzz IGL'd FaZe. Ooh. So if that, even if that wasn't something that might have really happened, just the idea those wheels were turning a year ago, basically, Maniac, that in a way that gives me a tiny bit more hope that this could be real. Like that makes it not seem like you were just going, this Cadian sucks, I'll do it, give me it, you know, because that's the one I hate is when I have heard the stories where a Shoxer and NiKo is sort of like, nah, I'll just fucking do it. But it's like, no, don't just do it. You have to do this role like for real. Essentially, like Nitro, you better commit to this. This better be like just your thing from now on. Because obviously, Twistzz is the biggest problem with him is he's so good individually. You worry like, what if that goes away? But I'll give you that though. I think that gives me like a pretty sweet. It means I'm going to give him a bit of a chance. I'm going to give him a chance. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I have no idea. I'm going to have to take your word for it, right? I don't know.
It's just something I heard. Yeah,
exactly. We're going to treat it as this actually happened. Yeah. And if that's the case, then obviously that's a really good omen for sure. I think in the interviews and sort of the statements that he's put out throughout the last few months, you could see that the seed was definitely planted in here for him to one day have more responsibility, become a captain, become an IGL. Like he said it a couple times on the HLTV Confirmed show as well. He said, you know what, maybe it's not now, but I can imagine myself one day being a captain. So I agree with you. It doesn't feel like just a spur of the moment kind of, oh my God, you know, fuck this, I'm going to be an IGL, that's it. Because then that would be really problematic. It seems like it's been more of a well thought out sort of initiative on his side. And the reason why I think this is really good is that I'm hoping that this is going to help him deal with the IGL tax, which is his level to a degree is going to suffer a little bit.
It surely has to, right?
Exactly. I mean, we saw with Device, if you're not being careful, you might just say, oh my God, he maintained incredible numbers. He also has a few series where you could see he's drowning a little bit.
Oh, definitely
because he's got to figure shit
out. Maniac, every series they do badly in, you immediately see it on Device. Like he can't just hard carry wild because you can see it's overwhelming him, the strategical side. Yeah, of course.
So if you're Twistzz, then the fact that you have thought this through, hopefully, then a part of you should be ready for that. Like a part of you should anticipate a little bit, how am I going to deal with this? Just in terms of emotional management, how am I going to go about, you know, a third map that is a little bit complicated? I have to come up with strategies. I'm missing my shots because I'm trying to micromanage. This is going to happen. And these are all going to be new feelings that even if he was a vocal player that had initiatives, he didn't really have to go through most of the time. Like Kerrigan or Cadian or whoever, his IGL was the one actually making these calls most of the time, and he could just do what he had to do at the best of his ability. Now, as an IGL, that's a little different. And that's the only place where I would hope like some groundwork has been done, just psychologically speaking, so he's ready to take on that. Because beyond that, I really think that this is a slam dunk for him in terms of the Counter-Strike that he's always played, the decision-making he's displayed when he was, how versatile he could be as a player as well. I think it's extremely important as an IGL that you are able to sort of play different domains, different sectors of the game, and you're not just if you take the example, you're not just a Yakinder profile who was an ultimate extreme entry fragger who then moved into an IGL role.
His role was pretty inappropriate to do it. I mean, it's why, by the way, we've given so much praise to Apex, because another player, I would never think that player would be a great IGL. Yeah.
We couldn't see it coming. So when it comes to Twistzz, you feel like he'd have a more versatile approach to the game, and that is going to fit him as well as an IGL, because he's going to have to plug in some holes here and there. So personally, I'm kind of excited about it. And I think, with what happened with Device and how it turned out, and then it's all opened our minds. Like we're more open-minded to like really strong players moving into this role. Hey, everybody was ready for NiKo to do it. I personally was disappointed that didn't happen. So we're all having this shift in terms of how we envision players and strong players being IGL. And for Liquid, if you have a man like Twistzz who is ready to commit to your organization, ready to make a transition to be an IGL, possibly being successful at what he's doing, why would you ever not do that? Like you could secure years and years and years of very strong direction and philosophy of your game with a player that is incredibly valuable. I mean, I wouldn't think twice if I was Liquid. I would definitely give him at least a chance to see if that works out for him.
I'm also going to throw this out there as well, which is, it might be the case, guys, that as the old adage in English goes, beggars can't be choosers. Liquid might not have had a lot of say about this, because since Twistzz was very good individually, even though Liquid was dodgy, I've heard that he absolutely could have been and gone to like a Vitality team again. Like that was on the table. So I also think, unfortunately, you can't sort of be like, just stay as a star player for me, because in that scenario, he might just go, well, why don't I just go be a star player for them and win everything tomorrow? So instead, it's sort of like, but hey, I have this idea about being IGL, and they're like, we needed IGL. Now, you know what I mean? You just make it work. It's a way to keep the person in the team. Because I'll tell you what, I actually think, Maniac, it's the opposite with NiKo. Are you ready? This is a different speculation. Because I've heard so many rumours over the last year or so, even after the Falcons period, that like maybe NiKo goes and joins a team. Honestly, people are asking about him. That thing about Falcons. Maybe Falcons is going to re-up. By the way, there's one I'll point this out a million times until you guys get it. When Falcons have the budget they have, and as long as they have people like Zonic, eventually they're going to get the team. It's just going to take time. It's going to depend which superstar says yes, but eventually someone is going to, not least because they can just say like, how about 70k a month? But, you know, they can do that if they want, and no one else can in CS right now. Like, believe it or not, unless, I don't think people even realize, the only person I'd ever heard of who really had the crazy salary like that was like Simple in Navi. And that's because he's simple, bro. That's not because of how the market works. That's because you have to keep him. It's fucking simple. You basically just say, how much do you need to never want to leave? That's what you just give him at that point in time. And spoiler, you then probably take like bit from the academy team and go, and here's your salary. And it's just, it's like half as much, you know what I mean? Like that's how you do it typically. Yeah. So the reason I actually speculate that NiKo, because obviously the joke is, Maniac, loads of us have flamed NiKo over the years when he did IGL, when he like had to, when they kicked people, because we were like, bro, forget even Twistzz, you're like the best rifler and you're doing it. Like that's going to tank your game. Well, the joke is, I feel like after Dallas, most of us, because it was a way to change the paradigm on the G2 setup, were like, actually, doesn't that in a fucked up Gordian knot way solve the Huxley equation, which is, if the Huxley equation is you have to get someone provably better as an IGL than Huxley, well then yeah, there's only about 4 or 5 names can even walk in the door, and they're probably all on teams. So instead, the way you cut the Gordian knot instead of unraveling is you just go, but what if I didn't need an IGL for Huxley's role? What if I had an NiKo IGL, which you just saw worked? And then, although I will always say it, he did, I think he even admitted he himself called Huxley's playbook. So it's not as simple as that would have worked forever. That worked for that tournament because he had Huxley's playbook. And I'll just throw this in there, Huxley apparently was remotely even fucking updating him with stuff. So mad props to Huxley. In many ways, he did contribute to that win. But the other thing is, if you had a NiKo's IGL, well, now I don't even need an IGL. Now I'm just getting a rifler. And I'm just basically getting like a lurker and an aggressive rifle, which it did look, by the way, on paper is what they did. It's just obviously they decided Sax's IGL, which has taken that whole narrative and chucked it in the bin. So here's where I'll spin a different narrative. So NiKo now himself, not even just privately, publicly has come out and said it's not the time for him to in-game lead. But he also did that thing where he sort of suggested, like, you know, it'll happen one day. Here's my speculation for you, Maniac. Similarly to the Twistzz one, but the other way around. Imagine you do think you might end up leaving. I think NiKo is smart enough to know, if I leave, I'm not leaving to IGL. If I IGL, I'm going to do it in this team and you build around me. So since maybe this is my last season in G2, maybe if we don't win the major, maybe if the slide doesn't work out, maybe Modesty and me are gone. By the way, maybe not even to the same location. Maybe we're just exiting, and maybe I'm in Falcons, maybe he's in fucking Cloud9, whatever. You pick a team that he could join, right? Or VP, obviously another one, right? If you imagine that world, I think actually it's smarter for NiKo. You stay with what you've got, which is the really strong rifle game now. If you go elsewhere and be a star, you can also still fulfill the original narrative and win the major. And then what you do is in a year down the line, 2 years down, then you go, now it's time to pivot. Maybe when your game falls off a bit, now I become IGL. Whereas I think if you're NiKo, I think, unlike the Twistzz one, it would be really dumb right now to go IGL. Because if you went IGL with this squad, I also think you might do that thing like Shox did, where you forever change your worldview on the game, and you can never go back to being that star player in some ways. And this roster, I don't think it's going to accomplish that much. So even though I might even argue, I might think it might be a better setup, I think you might have just been wasting your time for this last season if you're NiKo. Like, again, if you do it like, because I agree with you, if you're doing it like Twistzz, if it works, this is also sort of a commitment that he's going to be in Team Liquid for many years. Like, you know, he's going to just be here for 3-4 years and he'll be the IGL and you'll bring in the other players. So I just think in NiKo's career, I think it's the right move, actually. Even though I would have preferred it, if I forget that and I just look at the 5 players, I would probably prefer he takes IGL on with this roster. But I don't blame him. If I'm speculating, but if these moving parts are what he's thinking of, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack in there. You started this show by talking about how teams now do like a sequential announcement instead of having all at the same time. to me, what strikes me in the G2 situation is that they probably made it up as they were going.
It seems like
I don't think this was like a whole put together.
I think
plan.
I only heard the snacks rumor like 2 days before they announced it.
Exactly.
So that feels to me like
so,
actually they already probably had kicked fucking Huxley,
yes.
and they were just going down the list, and a lot of people probably said no.
I'm fairly certain that they actually really considered NiKo to be an IGL for a while.
Yeah.
I'm fairly convinced that this was a reality that they were toying with, playing with the idea, maybe studying like, hey, what kind of profiles can we bring in? And what I think happened, and again, this is pure speculation, but I do think what happened is that either financially or contractually, or just because maybe people turned them down or whatever, I don't think they could put their hands on an anchor strong enough that would justify the risk of putting NiKo as an IGL. Because if you think about it, if you can actually, again, pure speculation, you can bring Perfecto, like, which is a beacon of security as an anchor, like an absolute example in that role, then maybe you actually do consider the idea. And then you have Monesi as an Albert, you have NiKo who's going to try out his hand as an IGL, you have an incredible anchor down there, and you have the versatility of Hunter. Why not? You could consider it. But because they couldn't get there, then the next best thing was to have this idea of like bringing in a different IGL, keeping NiKo safe. And I think for him, I agree with you. Within this constellation, within these parameters, it makes more sense to remain a very strong rifle, to keep his credit as an individual as high as possible. In everybody's mind, we know it might happen one day, like he might actually be an IGL. The problem that he's got is that if he makes the jump too quickly with a lineup that is inadequate, and then he completely fails, then that is going to tarnish greatly how we imagine he could be an IGL. Like, you know how quickly we form an opinion about like how people can do it.
Well, the Yekindar one's the best example. We're all out on it. Exactly. No one wants to see it anymore.
Exactly. So for NiKo, if he felt like, you know what, now it doesn't feel like I have the cards to actually put an honest try out there, so I might as well remain a player, because you have to also admit that his individual level has had an uptick in the last few months. Like he went from being relatively average and pedestrian to once again being quite exceptional in terms of numbers and input. So if he's got that steam, that momentum, you know what, keep at it. Keep being excellent as a rifle, and then you know that eventually down the line, maybe codependent on one move, you could maybe become an IGL. But what you're not going to do is you're not going to leave G2 to try your luck in an uncertain project as an IGL somewhere. That doesn't make any sense. If you make that transition, you are taking such a risk on an individual level that you need to have the faith of wherever you're at, and you need to have like a long-term plan a la Twistzz, which is happening in Liquid right now, where your position is very secure and they're going to give you a little bit of leeway. They're going to give you that space to try out, figure it out. If you're NiKo rather, you want to do that someplace safe. This could be G2, but he would probably feel the need to have a lineup that is suitable for that. So I personally wished for him to try and be an IGL. I was ready for that move. It didn't happen. Fair enough. This might just be a step, just like a transitory step for NiKo.
Plus, if you notice on these shows, I was very honest that like part of the reason I also wanted to try NiKo IGL is that was a clever way to get Huxley out. Like that way I sort of counteracted that whole argument. We were like, oh, Kerrigan's not coming. Doesn't need to. We got NiKo. Get him out. Get a rifler in. So it was also that. I've got a little bit more info to expand out as well. Like one is when they did that famous Yekindar IGL move, obviously, like even though I will always to the end of the earth, Maniac, defend the Patsy move. I do think Patsy was a player who had potential. He actually looked like, I didn't know if he'd work in an international team because he's Russian, but I always thought in spirit he was like a decent player, and like I thought it was worth giving him a chance. So that one I don't mind. But the Rainwaker one's obviously the one everyone flamed, the Bulgarian player who looked like he just shot people in the chest, etc. Right? The thing is though, one, they clearly did recruit him to play specific roles, and he did play those roles. And then two, I've heard that's also an example of where you went down the list and you just went past loads of names and there was no one left. Basically, like I've heard that was a cheap move, Maniac. So it wasn't, if you think about it, right, since this is coming off the back of the era when they had brought back Nitro and made that team again, they got Yekindar for big money, etc. Like at that point, I think that was like a budgetary balancing move. They didn't remember every rebuild can't be we're going for the major no matter what you think of the org, because everyone would run out of money in a few years. Because the problem with the rosters like this Cadian one that fail is they don't even get through the whole year. You do like 6 months and then suddenly I have to buy more players. And then even worse, when I sell players like Cadian, I'm probably losing on that deal because people are going to buy them for less because the stock went down. Yeah, unfortunately, that aspect is a shame in how it works. Also, I've heard basically that the reason everyone can chill out about the whole Skulls thing is I've heard if you know how the deal works, they basically almost got it back off the Furia deal the other way around. So that one sort of resolved itself. So I say that to say they knew that Rainwaker wasn't some world class, but they were sort of gambling on him, and he was kind of like the budget rebalancing / give this IGL thing a try whenever that was, 2023. So yeah, there's that aspect. Then also, let me think, where do we go now? What should
Well,
we
if
go
you wanna talk about the ultimate situation, because that's I feel like we can do a parallel here, right?
Because this feels like another Rainwaker type move, right?
Exactly. That's how it feels to me. It feels to me that, oh, you know what, we're gonna take a chance on this obscure profile that's known just a little bit. He's peeked behind the curtain a couple times. He's played like, I think Ultimate played like one season of EPL in 2022. That was in CS:GO. I personally haven't put my eyes on him in a very, very long time. So it feels like it is in the same vein as the Rainwaker move, but I think there's a couple of differences that are important. One is obviously, as a sniper, he's going to be the center of attention and arguably of resources way more than Rainwaker was. Like, you have to imagine how complicated it might be for, and it's a little bit like what happened to Skulls. You bring in a comparatively smaller profile with less experience, and you tell him, hey, by the way, you're going to be an anchor. So just FYI, no one is going to do anything for you. You're not going to have flashes or anything. Please just do your job. And you're kind of on your own. I'm obviously exaggerating, but it's a little bit the story of that. Whereas if you are going to be a bit more centric in the game, then hopefully he's going to receive a lot more attention and resources to kind of be put together, and there's going to be an emphasis on him warming up. And you can even go one step further.
I see. He was on the IGL lineup. Sorry, he was on the IGL lineup. That was years ago in that one season of EPL. Right.
Yeah, that's the one. And then if I see even one step further, I think it might be easier to find an up-and-coming AWPer to replace if your first move doesn't work, whereas replacing an anchor. Like, anchors are not seductive roles in Counter-Strike. Yeah. Like, there's not a whole lot of people who grow up thinking, oh my God, when I'm a big guy, I want to be an anchor on the B side of Mirage. Like, no, that's just not
it's like being like a defensive midfielder in football or something. Like, you don't pick that. Like, you want to be the striker. You do that if, like, your coach goes, look, you're good at staying back and smart. You know, yeah, exactly. You get pushed into that role. I agree.
Exactly. I mean, maybe you realize that you're really good at it, and maybe you realize that, oh, you know, there's part of this gameplay that actually fits for me. Like, for example, I was a patient guy, so when I played as an anchor, it was fine because you need to have some patience and all. But like, I don't think there's a whole lot of people who out there just think, oh my God, this is it. I'm starting Counter-Strike today. I am going to play Pit on Dust 2. That is it. It's good. Well, no, I don't think that's what happens. So I think it's a little easier to try and grab someone else to be put in that role if needed. Whereas for Rainwaker, we could see how complicated that was. And then Skulls, once again, that didn't work out, which is why bringing JKS kind of was like a one stone, 10 birds. Like, it just solves so many different problems to have JKS coming in. And you also know, in terms of how much sort of tutoring and mentoring you're going to have to advocate in this team, you don't necessarily need to do that too much with JKS. Like, you believe that he's going to be self-sufficient, he's going to be autodidactic, he's going to figure his shit out, catch up with the meta if he's got to. You know, he's got the experience, he's been there before, he's done it when he got back to FaZe, he's done it when he went to G2. He can do that. So as the leader, as the coach, and as the more experienced members of that team, you can say, hey, Ultimate, it looks like we have enough time and resources on our hands to dedicate to you. Let's talk together. Let's take some extra time. And this is what happened in that situation. This is what you need to figure out. They're gonna need to do that to an extent, and you cannot do it for 3 different players. Like, there's only so many hours in the day, and there's only so much energy you can dedicate to that. So in that regard, why not? Why not? I'm open-minded. I'm not gonna say I'm hyped as hell to see this guy put on the Liquid tag. That would be untrue. It would be hypercritical. But I'm open-minded for a test.
Yeah, but the joke is, this is how little known that guy is. We started the episode with me saying it's Mene, then I mistook him for the German one, and then eventually, even the joke is I went through multiple different people. So
exactly.
No, it's because again, he's just barely been irrelevant in tier 1, guys. So it's just not the person we see. No, here's what's funny. Even though I actually will say at the outset, this is the player I'm very skeptical of. I actually do look at this and I think it's quite a cynical stopgap. This just looks to me like you have to have someone be the AWPer. By the way, that's the other downside about the Cadian thing failing. He fucked up your IGL and your AWPer, so you're not even just doing one move. So you're also, and then also, Team Liquid, quite frankly, in their history, have never been good with AWPers. Like, they've never played around the AWPer and given him all the resources like you do in a normal team. So actually, if anything, they're already a team that's used to going, you do this for a while, maybe, and then we replace it if it doesn't work. So what I actually think about this player is there's 2 aspects. There's actually a tiny little upside, and this is the tiny upside. This might sound counterintuitive, but you're going to think like most players, well, if he was this good and he was playing at AGO 2 years ago, why isn't he in a top team now? Like, why haven't I heard of him? Well, here's the point I'll make. With riflers, I would agree. If they haven't made it after all those years, are they really that good? Like what are the odds? You're going to go digging around and then you're going to find, the next Yikinda. Like, it's pretty unlikely, right? The reason why with AWPA it's not as crazy is there can only be one AWPA per team as a main role. So that actually means that when you're the AWPA, you're not trying to just be good. In theory, you need to be like top 15 in the world to be in a top 15 team. Like, it's a bit like IGL. It's one of the hardest roles to move up. So the reason I say a bit like IGL is we all know a la Snappy. Sometimes he can go lower and get an IGL. And if you give him the right pieces, it works. So I will say there could be a world where maybe this guy is sick, like low key. He just doesn't have a big enough profile and hasn't had the career path. He was stuck in AGO to prove it and get onto a mouse or something like that. And maybe this guy could have been in that pipeline in a different world. And then I'll just share this last part in, which is this is where I think maybe the myth R part comes in. So this guy's been a European coach for many, many years. This also looks like the other part you have to remember about Rainwaker joining is that was supposedly like a DAPS call. DAPS went and scouted some players and thought, right, this guy can do what I need in my team. Like, this is the role I want. I would imagine it's something similar. Maybe you've said to Myth, hey, we can't sign any big names. Like, we can't get some massive name AWPA. Obviously, we can't get Modesty, blah, blah, blah. But who would you want to work with? Is there someone out there cheap that you actually think has potential? Maybe, again, think about the sort of level he's coaching. He'd have seen this guy, presumably. By the way, maybe the players have even played with him. I don't know if he's in FPL, but something equivalent to that. Maybe they played pickups with him and they saw he had something, So I think it's not totally negative, but I am a bit concerned about it. I don't really know that that's like the future for me, because obviously, when I say it's a gamble, I do think you're going to have to eventually be pretty good. Like, if you notice, I was always pretty critical of Aussie. Aussie was never bad, but my problem was I did think, like, it's hard to be like sort of an average AWPA and then win the major, for example. It doesn't tend to happen very often. I feel like that is a role that should be for stars.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the problem is as well, since we do not know how Twistzz wants to play Counter-Strike,
Sure.
and I think it would be only fair to assume that there is going to be a sort of an AWP-centric sort of aspect to it, right? He was in phase, broke, he had full reign, full autonomy to do whatever the hell he wanted to have that kind of impact. I'd be surprised now to see them sort of divert towards a more passive, no space, no decision-making type AWPer. I hope that they do realize that this is how Counter-Strike is being played now at the very, very top level. I mean, if you look at teams that have the most success right now, the AWPers are obviously getting a whole lot of space, or at least they get to do exactly what they want. You have obviously polar opposites in Monacy and Shiro. I do realize they're not the same type players, but they do get to do whatever it is they want. And I think that remains true. And that also means that there comes a fair amount of responsibility with that. Now, again, if you are Twistzz, and the name of the game for you right now is to establish the Counter-Strike you want to play and to figure out the Counter-Strike you want to play, then you're surrounding yourself with people who, at first sight, might be malleable and might be accommodating to whatever it is you want to do. And this is obviously pure speculation. But again, with Ultimate, with Myther, you might have the opportunity to sit down everybody and say, hey, listen, guys, this is what I would like. Like, could you follow me on that? Like, do we see the game the same way? Is it okay if I take lead, I take charge of what's going to happen, and then I want you guys to help me, to support me? I want you, Ultimate, to watch this demo and figure out this playstyle. Myther, this is what I would like from you. I cannot really imagine a world in which Myther comes into Liquid and say, okay, guys, this is what's going to happen. Like, no, I don't think it's going to be the case. It can be a little bit tricky, especially in situations where a team starts losing and then the coach isn't really in a position of authority. That can get a little bit tricky, like live in official matches. But I don't really mind it exactly. I think he's going to have to work for his credit and credibility in the jersey. But at least for Twistzz, that gives him a very good platform to figure out what he wants to do as a leader.
I thought another roster we could discuss. In theory, this one's just rumoured, Maniac. But the rumours, if you look at them, seem like they're plausible and they check out. The rumour is there's that new Cloud9 lineup. Have you seen this one?
Ooh. Oh, that would be Heavy God, Interns, Icy.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about.
And then they keep Axel and Boomich. So what's funny about this one is I actually think this is an example of a team where it's just the fact that there was almost like a negative momentum in Cloud9 from the way they had. Remember, they almost composed the super team. Then right before they fully Thanos out and got the team together. Then like Shiro left before they'd like integrate the Boots, and then they never got it happen. And then the problem was, then it was like gradually like we all realized they couldn't hit the peak. They were sort of stuck at being a quarterfinal team, and then by the end they didn't have the opposite. You were just like, nah, whatever. And then even worse, people hoped, the rumor was maybe they do sign up Odyssey, they do some bad gamble, and then went the other way. They were like Electronics sold, and then Perfecto's on the transfer list. So actually, obviously, that's a massive bomber. If you think of like the emotional roller coaster, you're at the lowest point almost if you're a C9 fan. And I actually think with a lot of the like radio silence from the org, a lot of people have sort of just they're out on C9 now. Like if they're a Russian fan, they're thinking of VP and fucking Team Spirit. They're like riding with these teams, understandably. But I actually think if you look at these players, dude, I'm actually quite hyped about this roster. I think this actually looks, bearing in mind that it was implied to me that since they weren't signing a Odyssey, that they were going like the other route. They were trying to like scout players from CIS region who might be good, and I don't know, maybe the coach likes them or whatever it is. Dude, this actually looks like if you're going to gamble on some players, I like these gambles. Like if you think about it, right, you've kept Axel and Boomich, so they're already good players, especially in their role. In fact, I actually think Boomich is probably the guy who raised his stock the most in C9. Like we all see again, he's a very valid player. By the way, he wasn't even that terrible up when he had to. Like he actually showed me a depth I didn't know he had in Navi, so I have to say fair play to him. Axel already, we know, is capable of being really good. Clearly he's a guy for me where it's environment, who's in the team, does he get like, is he comfortable? So they keep those two pretty good pieces. Then if you think about it, right, Inter's already played with Axel already. And I always did think Inter's is like poor man's Perfecto. It's just a player who just, by the way, if you know the role and you put him in that role, he definitely can do it. Like he's clearly got the mind, like as you say, mate, it's not even about skills. Like, I think those roles are a mindset thing. They are like understanding you have different priorities. You're not just the guy who takes a peek and jiggle peeks and tries to kill the first three people. You play for time, you play angles, you use utility, you calm, etc. You play off your site mates. Like these are the things I always thought Inter's was good. His problem was the team he gambled on to get his stock back up was that fucking whack TSM lineup where it was like the most ridiculous rejects lineup ever. It was like Jax, him, fucking Val, you know what I mean? Like what Cypher, like none of those players in theory were bad, but it was like, what is this mixture? Like this is like when in the superstore they have a load of shit that's on sale and they just put it all in one basket. Everything in here $1. It was like that, You're like, what the fuck? So I think that one actually, if anything, made people forget Inters is a decent player. And then you think, right, if I'm adding Inters, obviously I'm not getting that much firepower, Maniac. So this last two roles, I've got a Rifler I need still, and I need an AWPer, right? Rifler is heavy god. If anyone's seen OG, was just really, he's clearly good. Like that guy clearly has skills, and I'm almost amazed this is the team we went to. I actually thought the word he was a world, people were rumouring it. Why couldn't this guy have been in G2 or something? If you wanted like a bit of oomph, you could have brought this guy in and he really could have hit the ground. He looks like he's going to be a top player. So I love that one. You get some firepower. And then actually the IC signing, I get that because he's from Kazakhstan, people are going to know that player that well because who was a big fan of Amcal? They were another one of those teams that sort of would be in the major but at the bottom of the rankings and maybe they could upset some. No one was a massive fan. But again, like I say about AWPers, I do think AWPer is the ultimate role where you actually can be sicker than your level. And actually, I don't hate this move. When I saw this guy play, he wasn't bad. He had some skills. No, here's the thing. I'm tempering it. I'm not going too crazy yet. But when I look at the whole roster, I don't mind this actually, mate. I don't really see like big holes or, in fact, it feels like they did a pretty good job role for role as well. It feels like there's a balance in most aspects to this team to me. Sight unseen, obviously.
Yeah, this is close to the best they could have possibly done because I think from a social credit standpoint, poor Axel and Boomich looked very, very sad after everybody just jumped ship, right? Yeah. And if you're a prospective player, that doesn't really send you a good message. If Electronic is signing to go away, Perfecto is benching himself, Shiro already jumped ship a long time ago. You would be very apprehensive to just decide, okay, I'm going to sign for Cloud9, let's do it. So I think that explains why they had to take sort of a risk and a gamble and go and fetch out some new prospective talent, because I don't think anybody that is super established in the CIS region would have immediately joined them. So that's step one. I do understand that. There's a lot to unpack, but let's just say for Inters, I agree with you that the TSM stint probably did him more wrong than his actual level. Like, I'm not saying he was a god before TSM, absolutely not. There were some very serious shortcomings in what happened in Cloud9 before that, and there were obvious games where he completely disappeared and his input was far from being sufficient. We're not going to rewrite history. I don't think he is as bad as the results and the stats sort of portrayed in TSM. Now, what interns had to hope for, if he wanted to remain at the very top level, was that somebody would know that he is worth more than what meets the eye at first glance. And this was kind of his only way back in, right?
The perfect people would know. Yeah, true.
Axel, you know me. Like, you know what I bring to the table. You know I'm not perfect, but this is what I can do. This is what I'll do. You know, don't worry about these numbers. Don't worry that I have 0.8 rating or whatever. Like, you know what I can do. He had to hope for that. He had to rely on that. That happened. Now, for Axel, which I think it might be the most interesting topic in the whole... We're going to talk about... I was going to talk about Heavy Gun and IC, but for Axel, what's really interesting is that I think what happened in the super team of Cloud9 was that Axel went from being sort of a kid that's got everything he wants to much lower in the pecking order of, hey, listen.
Understandably,
understandably. Listen, like, Perfecto is coming over, Electronics coming over. That's how they want to do things. So we hope that you can deal with that. We hope you get to play these positions. You're going to be comfortable because we're going to need to accommodate them. And you're not going to be the most important rifle on the team anymore. And very, very obviously, he struggled with that. And I'm not going to try to make excuses for him because I personally was the one calling out for him to be cut for a long time from that roster.
Yeah.
But I will say is that if you now shuffle the cards again and he ends up being at the top of the deck and he says, hey, this is where I want to go. This is where I would like to play. Like, now that sort of describes the entirely different situation for Axide in here. And I wouldn't be surprised if his level was much higher than what we've seen previously in Cloud9. Because surely Heavy God comes in and you want to accommodate him. But if I'm Axide, I'm not going to give every position.
No.
I'm not going to give everything. Like, we're going to say, hey, brother, like, let's do a compromise. Like, what do you want to play? What do I want to play? We're going to split the rifle positions between you and I, and then Boomich and Inters are going to do what they need to do, and then IC as an AWP is not going to be an issue. So I think this is a big win on an individual level for Axile. Now, quickly, Heavy God, I agree with you. Not much more to add to what you said. Very obvious prospect. The little games we saw in OG felt like he could already punch above the weight class that he was in quite easily. Fragging power off the charts, whether they're winning or losing, very consistent with the output. Very clear candidate to try his hand at something better. Although you could make the argument whether he's got a clear upgrade. I think, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not like it's the clearest upgrade of all time, but it is an upgrade anyway. Now, I see. I covered the RMR for PGL at the time when he was in AMCAL, and I have to say that his opening style on the CT side is something I really liked. I thought he struggled a little bit on the T side. Right. Tendency to be slightly too passive, not exactly creating like opportunities in duels. I'm sure this is something that he can work on. But on the CT side, he already had like a very nice ability to lock down bomb sites with clever rotations. He caught my eye. I didn't know him before that event. And as I was seeing the games unfold, I thought, you know what? I don't know who this kid is, but like something is going on here. Something is happening with this kid. He's got, obviously, at least he's better, what I imagine to be in AMCAL forever. I'm glad he's getting the call up, which apparently he didn't do it in the best of ways. Like there were some rumors that he's trying out with Cloud9 when he was still under contract. It got a little bit fuzzy. I don't judge. I'm not going to cast the first stone on that. But I'm glad he's getting the call and he gets to try at a higher level. And I think if you're Cloud9, both Heavy God and IC are good catches. It's just the interns one, we're going to have to live off of the credit that he had in the previous Cloud9 roster. And we're going to have to hold on to that. Because if it is TSM Inters joining in, then it's going to be obviously complicated. But the assumption is that it's not going to be the case.
Yes. Also, I actually have a more philosophical point for you on that thing about like the Axile electronic thing. Because, mate, I have seen this so many times in Counter-Strike. I would even say you could argue a similar thing happened with Twistzz in Team Liquid. Maybe there wasn't enough space for everyone to have the perfect role back in 2019 when they had that super team. And here's the problem I think you have, right, is when you're making a lineup, even when you're theory crafting it and then when you initially start the lineup, it's very common, actually, what you just said there, that if we're bringing in a big name, remember, if Electronic joins, well, in that scenario, that is someone that Axile has to give it up to. This guy's a major winner. By the way, he's even Russian like you, and he's what you want to be. If anything, he's the player you look forward to, and he's still good now. So if you bring that player in, and you haven't won, especially Cloud9 barely ever won anything, of course you accommodate that guy. Of course you say, look, first things first, even though I'm Axile, let's get you comfortable electronic. Let's get you really good in this team, and then I'll figure out where I fit in, right? The problem with that is I've seen this happen a lot of times. Because the move is like you yourself are buying into the idea the team needs this. We need this guy, right? You're basically saying, I'll take maybe not my ideal role or spots because it'll make us win. Well, there's two problems you have. One, you better win, Because if you win, you can always do that thing Twistzz and FaZe do, which is, it doesn't matter if my game's not its peak. I'm winning though. Like, you can do one of those interviews that they all love to do, the Zontixes and the fucking Immers of the world. Who cares if I'm bottom of the scoreboard if I win the tournament? I've always said on that one, that sounds really stupid if you don't win. But if you do win, it actually is valid. It does work on some level. It's why Fifth Lauren in NIP, even though his stats were terrible, you could always make a case. Maybe he'd add something to the chemistry. Maybe that's why they win. It's not really like it's just them four fragging and he sits there like, well done, well done. Like, he was obviously doing something. It's just hard to infer. But if they win, obviously it works, right? My problem is this. You either don't win, so that immediately makes you think, maybe I want those roles back. Or the other obvious thing is, in the short term, it won't matter that you might not be as good and as comfortable because you're going to think to yourself, well, I'm adapting still, aren't I? And unfortunately, a lot of pro players, in my opinion, notice is one of my eternal philosophical battles on these shows is, most pros disagree with me, mate. They don't even think roles exist. They really think it's just good players and that good players will figure it out and can do every role. Famously, Snacks himself, which might be famous last word, Snacks, for your career when I saw you in Mouse and now in G2, even people like him doesn't believe there should be roles. I think there's just like, I think he said something like there's just attackers, defenders, and the IGL or something. He had some like almost football simplistic breakdown of how it worked, you know. Whereas I would say I think roles exist for a reason. I think people need certain spots and comfort and things that they like and to know what they're doing. So the other factor is if you don't win, there's also the period where you get like 2 months in and you're like, well, we're not winning, and this has just tanked my game. Like, I'm not as good anymore. And by the way, no fan who's a casual fan's going to get this complex thing that I've changed. They're just going to look at my numbers and think I'm still Axile in this analogy, and they're just going to think I suck. And in fact, like you said, they're going to start calling for me to be fired, and maybe I'm not even doing my fucking spots anymore. So how am I supposed to? And that is that you can see the frustration will fucking build there. And then eventually, what's going to happen is you're either going to get kicked or you're going to ask for your roles back, aren't you? You're just going to go, hey, I want those back. In fact, you know what? Since we're not winning even, maybe I'm better than you. So, in my opinion, you can always do that in the short term. I know loads of players, even egotistical ones, that if they think it will make them win, they will actually do what we all tell them to do. Sacrifice, be humble, you know, give space. But I'll tell you what, when it becomes that the team is like a Liquid-style team where they're stuck at like 8th, that gets really tired because the one thing you want is to feel like you're having a good game yourself or that you're in the game. I mean, there's a big one too, Maniac. If you ever give up a role that had a lot of agency and then you're stuck doing some shit role, like obviously being like CT anchor, that is the nightmare then because then it's not like you even have the way to get yourself out of this hole. You're relying on them to do it. So I've always thought that's an aspect that's really underrated. Like I appreciate players who are willing to do it, but I do think it's naive to think everyone can just swap around and will make it work.
I know. I agree with you. I wanted to bounce back on like this role
go for it.
sort of definition of concept because the way I look at it, I can understand where Snacks is coming from in terms of like there are skills that are transferable to any position in Counter-Strike. Like if you have game sense, if you can hold your nerves, if you can greatly communicate and understand the information, transfer it into actual knowledge, like all of these skills sort of apply to wherever you are in the game, whenever you are in the game. So if you take an extremely strong player, that's why a NiKo, a ZywOo, a Simple, no matter what situation they would find themselves in, they would find a way to optimize it. So to an extent, that's true. But I think it would be reductionist and false to say that there aren't specific skills that are necessary for certain roles and certain situations in Counter-Strike in order to shine. And very definitely for Axile, he seemingly didn't have it wherever he ended up in Cloud9 before. And like one of them was obviously, and for him, I was never really sure if it started, it's a little bit like, was it like the, you say that the hen or the egg or whatever it is?
Chicken or
like,
the egg, yeah, which came
exactly,
first?
Exactly. I wasn't exactly sure whether it was he just hates that role, which means he plays bad, which means he's got low confidence, which means he plays bad, or it started the other way around, where he was actually just lacking confidence in what he was doing, which meant he was taking the wrong moves, which meant he was playing bad. But you could definitely see that it's one thing to be compromising and sacrificing and say, hey, you know what, Electronic, I'm going to give you this spot. It's fine. You know, I understand how it works, but you still have to do your job. Like this, just being compromising and forgiving, it doesn't mean that you are just suddenly exonerated from all of the duties that you have in your roles. Like you still have to be strong in your roles. It doesn't do anybody good in the team if you do 1 kill every 3 rounds as an anchor so that you accommodate a star. Yes. Nobody benefits from that. And very clearly, Axile, in some of the positions where he was playing an anchor, where he needed patience, he needed to have the right decision-making at some point, he needed to have some confidence in some of the duels. He just didn't have it. He didn't make the moves, he didn't go for informations, he was getting caught off guard. Like, all of that was actually happening. And that in itself has nothing to do with where Electronic is playing. It's just he himself, in these roles, seemingly wasn't equipped to deal with it. Like, again, playing anchor, and I speak from experience, I don't think the roles have changed tremendously from my days. There have been some adjustments, but at its core, it remains like the idiosyncrasy of the roles remains kind of true. Being an anchor means that you have to have your shit together emotionally speaking. Like there's going to be tons of moments where you need to make your own decision and you're going to be in chaos and nobody's going to help you, and you need to remain calm. You need to analyze correctly what's happening. It's not just you're being thrust in chaos and then you're shooting left, right, and center. And anyway, I started blasting and you're having a good time. This is just not the role. Sure. And not everybody is equipped to deal with that. And seemingly Axel wasn't in some of these roles. So this is where, as far as I go when it comes to roles. Are there skills that transfer overall? Sure. But there are still certain traits that are specific and are going to be needed to be a good, quote unquote, little bomb side anchor, for example.
By the way, the two players I would put forwards, because they're from recent memory, that will show how important roles are Kindar and Axile. Because remember, in 2022, they were both at their peak at the time. Mate, they had incredible crispy aim. They were the guys who would pop out and do the two headshots and turn all round. So they were the guys where, when they had things the way they wanted, they were really good. And man, the drop-off was crazy. Because that's the other thing. When a player has skills like that, you can just see with the eyes that they're not able to do it. Like, they're not winning it. Like you say, the reason it has to be on some level of comfort or a confidence thing with Axel is you would watch him take the same peak he would have with an M4 before, and he would have won that fight before. Whereas now we maybe like, whiff the first guy, then hide, then get pushed off, and you're like, who's this guy? Where's the guy that was like a headshot in the top 20 player? Oh, I'm with you. That's why actually an underrated part in this discussion, by the way, is I'm going to read off some names here that are players I'm almost certain fans think I overrate, but you'll see why I'm going to read this list of names off. If I read off names like Keto, Jax, Inters, Shush, JKS even. The reason I think people think I overrate is because what I love about these guys, mate, is they not only know their role, they actually like their role. They actually, like, this, dude, Jax isn't just the guy where it's like, we're playing football and we're all 7, and it's like, well, I'm striker, I'm winger, I guess you're in goal, Jax. Like, the joke is he'd be the guy, start playing goal, guys. Like, at the beginning, you'd be like, oh, I want Jax on my team, mate. Like, the idea is the striker at the beginning of the games when you're picking teams, you go, I'll have Jax. You want the guy who wants to be the goalie, you want the guy who actually likes that role, doesn't think it sucks and just lets the goals go in. So that's why I even threw in people that you wouldn't expect, like Keto. Like, dude, I've heard that guy's totally up for just being the first in every time through a brick wall, getting shot in the head immediately with no util. Like, tell you what, there's not many players can do that and keep their mental frame together. So I don't care. Yeah, he might not actually be the best player in the world, but I tell you what, I like to build squads with those players, though, where I know they want that role, they embrace it.
That's what you just said. What is important is that these people are actually going to go through with the roles and remain some sort of sanity. Like, they're going to keep some sort of sanity, and they're going to keep working, and they're going to keep being constructive and positive about what it is that they're doing. They're trying to learn new shit about their roles. Like, this is the whole difference. This is the make or break of people who are making a transition into a role that they don't really know nor really appreciate. Like, the question is, how are you going to mentally deal with the obstacles that are going to be put in front of you? Because granted, even if you're a strong Counter-Strike player, if you completely and drastically change the role that you're playing, at first, there's going to be a learning curve, and maybe you're going to have you're going to have a good time the first because you're learning a lot every practice, which is great. Like, the learning curve goes really quickly high up, but eventually you're going to plateau, and you're going to struggle, and it's going to take a whole lot of time. It's going to take an open mind to rethink the problems and all. If you inherently hate what it is you're doing, it's going to be very complicated for you to dig yourself out of these holes. Like, the only way you can actually surpass that is by fully embracing the new Counter-Strike you have to play, the new roles you have to play, the new obstacles that are being put your way. And this is where, if you actually have an anchor, like, look, if you go to all of the anchors at the very top level and you say, hey, listen, I have an offer for you. I'm going to give you like a 3-month position period, and then you get to be a star rifle. I don't think a lot of people would say no. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. Yeah, no, I'm not going to play Connector on Mirage. That sounds like it sucks. Maybe some would, because they've now really have the love intrinsically of what they're doing. But everybody would say, oh, actually, yeah, that sounds great. Like, please film me, what happens. Put me there. I'm going to have a good time. But they still feel okay where they're at. And they still take some pride, and that is a very rightful and adequate pride, in doing what they're doing good. Being a strong anchor. Being the guy that does 2 for 1 or 1.8 for 1, being the guy that stay alive the extra 10 seconds just to get the backup coming up. It's like you were saying, be a very, very good defender in football. Although we all know all the strikers are always getting all the loves and all the flowers and the Ballon d'Or and all of the accolades. It always goes to the striker. Maybe a 10 or something like that gets some love. But very rarely do we actually hype up defenders and all.
Yes.
But some people actually really like it, and they understand what they bring to the table. And that is the real question with your lineup. Do you have people in these roles who actually take pleasure in dealing with that kind of shit? Like
Yes.
it's like I was reading. There's a book, Mark Manson, I think it's called, like How to Not Give a Fuck, or
The
the
art
subtle
of
art
not
of not
giving a
giving a
fuck or
fuck.
something, right? Yeah,
Exactly.
there you go.
And there's a line in there which I thought was really, really interesting. Is like, the goal in life is not to not have any problems. The goal is to love the problems you have to solve.
There you go. Yes.
And I fucking love it. Like, I
Yes.
actually love this way of looking at life. You're not trying to find something where you have no problem ever. No,
Yeah.
you're trying to find the problems that you sort of kind of enjoy dealing with. And this is what you have to do. Well, we got really philosophical for a second, but this is what you want from your anchors. Like, in per se, that's what you need from them.
By the way, there's a similar one. Like, there's a quote from like Bob Marley where he said something similar. Where he said something like it was something like the gist of it was like, in relationships you're always going to get hurt. The point is you have to find the people it's worth getting hurt for. I thought it was a similar sort of scenario. You know, here's what I would say about this as well. I actually think a discussion that people should have, but they don't seem to have very much on these shows. I think it was like Flom or someone I saw reference this, but I think he's right. Is whenever no one ever discusses until you come to make the lineup who is going to be the anchor. That's almost an afterthought, like G2's example, where they haven't got an anchor and they just recruited all these players that don't play that role. And they're just going to have to, it's implied Malbs is just going to take that role. And that's not what he was doing in M80. The reason why I bring this up is I feel like when we build teams, we just model the T side. And then we take that classic saying from the old days, like, well, CT side's very individualistic. It's just people shooting. And it's like, yeah, but CT side's also about how you fit together and comfort and who's watching what. And there are dynamics. It's just they're not necessarily led by an overall IGL and a playbook and a set of that. But I do think sometimes teams, even when they build squads, maybe aren't considering the CT stuff enough. Like, you want the T roles, yes, but you also need to know, like, for example, if you're the best in the world on one of the maps, you better have someone who does anchor that, like, small site, for example, like, and then you better have a player that can rotate. Or, like, again, we can't have 5 A site players and then have no anchor and then just tell him, I guess you're just learning on the fly, because that's a scenario where that guy could just completely sink, like, could just fail. And I do think the problem with the anchor role is this. Is one, for me, it is one of those specialist roles. It's a bit like entry fragger on T-side. Again, I agree with you, mate. You've got to love this type of role. It can't be where you're just doing it because they tell you have to, and then you're just like desperately in this analogy, it's like you actually can't swim in the deep end. You're just like trying to keep your head above water, and you're taking in a bunch half the time, you're drowning a bit. I'm all right, guys. Like, you can't be doing that. You have to basically be comfortable, even if you're bad at it, like the Inters player, right? And I'll tell you what, the reason why I think this role gets ignored is when someone's really good at it, they make it look too easy. Like, I'll give you a bunch of historical names. I'll give you some current and past. So the current ones would obviously be Jim Pat, fucking JKS, Perfecto. These guys obviously have made their name. They've made a fucking whole salary and won championships. But if you go back in the day, this is what Crims was doing in Fnatic. They made him fucking amazing. And the point is, he could be the MVP from doing that role. So the other thing I do think, a bit like what you said earlier, is that's the difference between when someone embraces it and when they have to do it. Because I actually get the vibe that when someone like a Crims or a Valde or JKS or something, when people do it, they have totally embraced that that's their role. Like, if I was using the analogy before football, they're like some Maldini guy. Where, like, they're not just the defender. They're really good at it, though. Like, they're super skilled. They love it, and they want to be the defender. Like, maybe a player like that, by the way, probably could. I'm a fan of Liverpool, right? And one of our defenders is that guy Trent Alexander-Arnold, who, because he's really good at crossing the ball, like you see for England, he probably could be a midfielder if he wanted. He could just say, like, put me on the right in midfield or make me a defensive mid. But in theory, in Liverpool, he plays as a right back, because the angle is, if he can do the defensive stuff and he's got that in his game, it makes him OP. Like, you've got a guy from that role giving you more than you want. So I do think that people think, again, you just make star lineups, HLTV forum style, and then, like, you know, they just decide by themselves, like, well, I'll do this and I'll do that. And because the other thing I've noticed is this, Maniac, the one area again where roles have become more set, in my opinion, is actually nowadays on CT side, it does seem like people make those roles hard. If you're the anchor, they make you anchor on almost all the maps. Like, that isn't like the old days where it's like, well, I'm good on nuke, so I'll take that one, but you take that spot on dust too. I feel like in the modern day, that's why I compared it to entry fragger, they do sort of make you do it a lot of the time. Like, if you're the anchor, you better like that role, because you're going to play it on 6 maps, mate. And I'll tell you what, that's going to get really rough, for example, if you're the guy who doesn't play like fucking Mirage, and then that's like your map that can be punish picked anyway. You're just playing anchor all day long. Like, you're in for a hard life, mate.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the reason this is happening is that beyond just the position that you're playing, I also think that what you want to do long term, what you hope to have in your team, is you're hoping to have synergies between like duos and trios, right? You're hoping to have sort of a natural synergy, and you're hoping to have not only synergy in terms of I flash for you, you flash for me, but also in terms of decision making. Like, someone is taking charge. Like, we used to call that like surgeon, right? Whoever is in charge of the A bomb site, like someone that's pretty vocal, someone that's going to make the decisions. Okay, when is it that we're retaking information? That's famously what Vitality is was or probably still is struggling with when Apex says, fuck it, I have to play these positions because I'm lacking someone on the other side who's making these calls, right? So the reason you want to cultivate that is that because you want to find some profiles who can make these decisions. And this is where, to sort of circle back to the anchor role as well, you have to love it intrinsically because, one, it's not really a role where you're going to get a whole lot of external love unless you have an incredible game and you top all the charts and you have 3 clutches. It's going to be very rare that people say, oh, Jesus Christ, like this anchor is completely incredible. Like we can name on one hand, like the anchors that have taken the spotlight. But it is one where if you are really in love with the game and you are in tune with your team, there are so many ways you can have impact. There's so many ways you can make your team better by giving good communication, counting the smokes correctly, giving away, or rather telling who you heard, when are they coming back? Do you refresh your information? Oh, they're coming B. No, wait a minute. No, that's a fake. Only 2 smoke. Only 1. Don't move. You can win round for the other side, for the other bomb side, because you're really good. And then also, if you have good synergy with your duo, at times you can make the play that actually wins the whole game. It's not going to be directly translated into the stats. I'm going to give you an example which happened to me a couple times and still happens now at the top level. If I'm playing Mirage on the CT side, and by 50-second, I, the B hanker, have a feeling, and I push B apps, and that's clear, I almost won the round for my team. But nowhere, it's never going to be written anywhere. I'm not going to get an assist. I'm not going to get any kills. Possibly, I'm not going to see any of the action. But if I can tell my team, hey, guys, there's nobody B at 40 seconds. It's A. Like it's an A split or it's an A go. And all of the defense move towards the A side and we destroy them. I don't get any kill. If anybody looks at the game, they're going to maybe see me at 7 frags down there in the bottom. But you actually won the round. You won the round. This is it's just not external. It's something that you have to know for yourself. And not everybody is equipped for that.
No, I'm with you on that one. Like, if people don't understand the other premise he's saying, obviously you're still taking the same gunfight. But the point is, like, for example, if they're all attacking A on Mirage, you're not all just going to rotate off and go and spawn and wonder if you have to go to B, and you might even hold your ground. You might use all your util early. Yeah, there's a billion angles. I'm with you. That's almost like you get the spiritual assist, even though nothing shows up on a scoreboard, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Because if you think about it, that's even an underrated part. Like, the joke of why the coach bug was OP used, it was like you didn't need to have a player make an information play. You had the information. And guess what? Guys, when people have the information, they can win a lot of fucking rounds, even if they're the worst
100%.
team. Yeah, of course.
100%. Information wins you rounds, like almost as much as headshots. Like when you've been a professional player, you know that without a doubt.
Which, by the way, is the reason why I'll actually give credit. I forget if it was Maui, it was someone on one of my shows who pointed out that when the rumor was maybe G2 was going to sign Perfecto, because again, like if you want an anchor player, he's mega, right? But someone pointed out, technically, we don't know how good his English will be. Like, he's not even somebody who did interviews particularly. Obviously, he wasn't somebody who played in teams that spoke English. And the reason why I think that's a very valid point, Maniac, is as you were saying, when I think of Perfecto, I'm only seeing what I see on the screen. Yeah, what he does on the screen would be brilliant in G2. But for all I know, maybe in Russian, he's making extra comms, like you're saying. Maybe he's really smart with that, or shrewd, or he can even do secondary calls or something. And maybe that wouldn't work in English all the same way. Maybe that's not the dynamic he would have. And if so, maybe actually we wouldn't end up getting what we think is Perfecto. We'd have like neutered Perfecto, as it were. We'd have a guy just playing almost with no comms at that point in time. Maybe it's just like an FPL guy. So I get what you mean. I do. That's why I say I think it's just when people construct these rosters, we need to give a little bit more thought to these things. We can't just get good players and then afterwards figure it out. I mean, the joke would be, I'll even give a topical example. Isn't that what all the discussion about the England national football team has been? It's not the idea they don't have good players. The joke is, if anything, they have too many good players and they can't get them all to coexist. Like, they're trying to do the thing of the HLTV fan, where if you notice, most discussion is just put all the 4 midfielders I think are the best in. But I always say the opposite, Mania, because I come from team sports, so I understand dynamics. I always say the opposite. Like, if I was the England manager, I'll tell you what, there'd be a lot of fans really upset with me, Maniac, because I'd have to pick who they might be, but I would be taking a couple of world-class midfielders and they wouldn't play. I would say I'm picking the ones that for my system work, they work together, and I think are going to win us the most games. And if that means, I'm sorry, a guy who maybe is like one of the best in the world's on the bench, he just didn't fit my style. Like, maybe a lesser player fit with these guys. Like, the example would be, I think some Man City fans wanted Foden to be like the Ballon d'Or winner. Well, here's the thing. He is really good in Man City, but in England, I'd rather have that Cole Palmer guy all day long. He looks way more promising. So I would upset the Foden fan then if I took him off. But my point is, like, I do think you can't work backwards from the names. You have to start with the roles and work towards the names and figure out who fits them. Because at the end of the day, like, one thing that is underrated about Counter-Strike is, this is the downside of the fact that when people play, they play Premier, or they play Face It, or they play essentially pickups, is that just looks like Counter-Strike, but it isn't professional Counter-Strike. Like, it doesn't even approach it really, right? Because I know a fan will sometimes mistake thinking that they know what is going on, but it's like, unless you know what the comms and the protocols, or the stuff you don't have in a POG, like, that's what really that's where the Pro CS is decided.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the baseline, the DNA is the same, and you can get a sense of what the experience is just idiosyncratically to play the game. But at the very, very top level, when you have a phase going up against Vitality, there are so many intricacies that come into play, which is really, really hard to understand. And media, if you haven't exactly been privy to the experience. And this is also where I think there is not of a responsibility, but it's kind of a luxury for shows like these or for the desk to actually bring that into the light, like to actually try and help people understand, hey, like these are sort of the sub levels on which this is happening right now. These are the layers of that play. These are the layers of that round. And this is what we try to do to get people to understand that. And I think it's also sometimes a little bit hard because I don't even know. I think most players are aware of it, but not every player is extremely cognizant of that reality. Like, I think sometimes coaches have to do that, or leaders have to do that from like a top-down perspective. Say, okay, these are the players that I have. This is what I have to be careful of. Because some players, as good as they might be mechanically and as good of an understanding of the game that they have, not everybody's got like a meta sort of ability to observe the game and think about their own role and how they interact with everybody in the system. No, some people are just expert at what they do. And so for a team, that's what we like to call like a vision. You need to have a vision for your team. You need to have a structure, and that needs to make sense. And this is what, in my eyes, this is what the GM, the coach, the leader are responsible for, and not just bring in like, oh, these 5 names look cool together, I'm sure they're going to play good CS. Like, no, that's barely what happens in Counter-Strike.
I've got a team that we should revisit that we talked about a lot when they first formed. It's Astralis, right? Because one, they're not at the Esports World Cup, guys, so we're not going to see them for a while, actually. I'm assuming it's like Blast or something, we'll see them at next. And two, the reason why I bring this up goes like this, Maniac. This is why being an analyst is such an interesting job, because you get to simultaneously look at the bigger picture when you're thinking of like the year and the future, but then you're in the day-to-day, you're in the trenches watching each match. And so this is an example, I think, with Astralis of where framing is so important as to how people feel about a team, because since the framing initially was like they've kicked Flame F, who was pretty much a guaranteed frag, they're making Device the IGL, so everyone thought, oh, he's going to tank his game. Remember, there was a world where he would have been much worse than this. He might have just been a bad AWPer and then just an average IGL, and then on top of that, Stown was playing like shit. The newer guys are new, like actually Stown was doing decently, but the Bro guys completely new off Monty, and he's got a lot of pressure. There was a million reasons this could have failed, right? Because I think expectations were almost at zero. In fact, I think most people, even people like us who love him, were almost waiting to tell Device. That's why you don't just switch to IGL, mate. Like, you've done the classic mistake a lot of great players have made. Then, because the expectations were low, the early results were like, fuck, this is actually good. Like, not only were the results good, you would watch them in the server and be like, the eye test checks out, this is good. Like, even the way Device is moving, like, he is able to sort of mix up calling, and he clearly is calling real tactics and real rounds, but then he also is getting his frags off as an AWPer, and he's still playing some of those spots correctly, and you would watch it, and for a while, early on, it felt like, mate, this is actually one of the fastest ramp-ups I've seen in a long time. Like, this team looks like, for real, like maybe on its like 3rd event, it's going to like break through and win a tournament. Like, they could just like straight up win a cup, and all of a sudden we have like a cool dark horse team. This is the problem. This is where framing gets you, Maniac, because then the framing became, they're really good. You watch them in the game, they're good. They're a fun team to watch, by the way. And they're this close to winning. Like, they're always losing that third map 13-10 or 13-11. The problem is, they just kind of stayed there. That was the plateau. Yep. And at the moment, I have to say, it's sort of got to the point now, Maniac, where I'll do that for the first few events. I'll go, give him another chance, give him another chance. But then eventually, you run out of chances. Like, I look at this team now and it's sort of like, I'm scared this is as good as they're going to be. Because if this is as good as they're going to be, then the ceiling isn't as high. Like, the ceiling is like, me in a semi, maybe, playoffs at the major, but don't win it. Look, and if that is the case, look, it's not a bummer. Like, I do actually enjoy watching this team play, by the way. It's one of those weird things whereas, for example, like, I didn't like watching Falcons play, but they would sometimes have close results. Like, when I watch them in the server, I do enjoy watching Astralis play, and I always feel like they're in the game, but it's become consistent to me that they lose and that they're not going to be the best team. And so I'm actually starting to worry, like, whether they're going to fit in. Are they just going to be just a good team? What do you think of this?
Well, first of all, I think even if they were to stabilize where they're at now, it would still be an upgrade compared to where they were before.
Definitely.
With the Behemoth lineup. It would still have been a quote-unquote good move. Like, it put them in a better position.
By the way, you could even argue this is still the best Astralis for years and years at this point in time.
I think so. I think you can make that argument, and I would make that argument. But what is truly interesting is what you basically just explained, how throughout the first few months of a new roster, you have this very quickly evolving model of a team that every match is just... It's like super fascinating for me. Like,
it's
from
awesome,
a scientific standpoint, like short term, and this is why sometimes people would like me to be more sensationalist and have bigger statements and all, because at the very beginning, people don't realize that because the sample size is so small, then the variance is incredible. Like, you don't really know what you're expecting from Astralis, and oh my god, what do you mean semi-final in Chengdu? Holy shit, semi-final in Pro League! And then what people do is they create this like linear projection, and they just infer, well, that would mean that then in Blast they're gonna go to the final, they're gonna win. And you create this incredible predictive model of a team, and then that model is then being tested with actual reality, and then you need to reassess event after event after event. And this is why I usually wait like 3 to 4 months so I can have an actual opinion, because I feel like it's going to give me enough of a sample size that I can stabilize with an opinion about a team. For Astralis, the eye test was incredible, first off. Like, for two main reasons. One, because Device didn't have the drop-off that we sort of anticipated or were apprehensive of. Maintain an extremely high level, with the exception of the losing series, because that remains a true factor. And then two, you finally get what you were supposed to get out of Staven and Yabi. Which had terrible, terrible stats prior when they were brought in as this super Danish team with Behemoth, and now are actually delivering what you needed. So like, these two elements been put together, and you're like, holy shit, Astralis is going to be a top 3 team in the world, which obviously completely exaggerated statement at that time. We had absolutely no legs to stand on our argument. We didn't know if that was going to be the case, but we get excited. We're human. We all do that. So because I saw that coming, I'm not that dejected about Astralis, because I tempered myself at the very, very beginning. I still hope that they will... No, I just hope this isn't the finished product. I hope there is still like a margin where they can get slightly better. I hope Device can find a way to be more impactful in like these famous map 3 of a long series that are grueling and exhausting. I hope Yabi can do a little bit more, because he also was... Now, he had an incredible start with this iteration, and he cooled down a little bit. Hope he can better. You have to assume that Bro and Stare also have like a way through which they can grow as players. It's not like they've been around for 10 years. So you would assume that there is a path they can follow. So I'm cautiously hopeful with Astralis, as there is still improvement to be witnessed. But yeah, it's a good reminder. Like, sometimes, guys, we have to be a little bit patient with the final statement and the final evaluation of a team where they have been together for like 3 weeks. Please. Because all you're doing is you're just hurting yourself. Like, you're setting yourself up for failures, thinking that 2 events is giving you enough data to make sure, or to be sure about where a team is going to go. You're doing that to yourself. That's self-inflicted, right? Let's have a little patience.
And then the other team I thought I'd bring up, obviously it's on brand, is Vitality, right? And the reason I bring this up is this, Maniac. If you just look in the server and the results, you don't touch it. It's one of the best teams. By the way, this lineup absolutely could win the major. They could win any tournament. Like, it's good enough. You've got the pieces. When they come together, by the way, sometimes there are times when this team comes together, they're OP. They sometimes have like 3 of the top 10 players and no one else does. Like, they kind of are like right up there when they're at their peak. Obviously, their problem is, let's say their day-to-day, they've also got variance in their performances, even individually, but as a team. And the other problem I'm going to bring up, and this is why I want to shade this in here, is it'd be one thing if they themselves were thinking what I just said, like, no, we're really happy with this line. This is the perfect line. Don't change it. We like all these players. Yeah, okay, results haven't always come, but, give us time. ZywOo's working it out. We'll get Messi integrated. If they said all that, that'd be cool. But the problem I have is this. I mean, think of some of the things I've inferred earlier in the episode. I've heard the whole time this year, mate, they've been looking at potentially bringing a player in or taking a player out, and they've been looking at who's available. And by the way, going for big names. I'll even say that for the Team Liquid. I forgot to mention that. Team Liquid did have a lot of big names who said no. They aren't idiots. Like, when you heard that Joker Steve thing where he said he made a list or whatever. Yeah, obviously the top of the list were really good players, guys. Like, I'm telling you, if you knew the names at the top they wanted for like IGL and Orpa, you would all be super hyped if they'd have joined. It's just unfortunately those people didn't want to join Team Liquid or had better teams now, they thought, or better chances to win. So the problem obviously is Vitality, if it's true that they've been trying to make these player moves, here's what I was going to bring up, which is that also, if it's true, would also somewhat explain the results a bit more. Because if you think, well, you know, maybe in a month or two we're getting a new player or we're bringing this guy in, it becomes a lot easier to just go and play with an imperfect squad and have up and down results and think, okay, I keep playing, you know, like eventually they're going to figure the roster out. The issue there becomes, Maniac, if you've been thinking you might make a change or you want to make a change and then you can't, and you really do have to stick with the roster. I mean, at this point, if you don't do a change in this particular break, it's inferred to me you're probably going to the end of the year. You're going to go to the next major at the end. So essentially, you're adding another season. You're going to play with these lineup. That's where I start to worry, though, that even though you are a contender, that's where like the morale shit can start to affect you, though. That's where people do start to realize this is the lineup and we're going to win with this. Like, this just has to be the best in the world. What do you think on that aspect? Because that's something I start to worry about, you know, psychologically for teams.
No, it definitely makes sense. If somehow in the back of your mind you were convinced that a roster change was going to happen, or you have this idea that irremediably during the break or before that you were going to make a roster change, then this might sort of protect you from actually really facing the problems head on, and you can be a bit more ignorant or like willfully blind to it because, you know, I know what, we're going to change lineup anyway. Let's try to make the best out of whatever we have. It's okay. And then this could help you short term, just alleviate the pressure. But the downside of that is, as you say, if you actually end up not making any changes, then suddenly you have this backlog of issues that now need to be put in center stage and you need to talk about it. And it's even worse because you need to catch back up on all of the frustration, bottled frustration, and all of the upsetness that happened before. You need to bring that back and sort of process through it, right? And that in itself is a huge fucking challenge when it comes to psychological perspective. It's really complicated to do. And I'll go a step beyond, and the reason why I personally start worrying about Vitality, the same way whenever one team has one incredible result, I am tempered with my expectations. But then suddenly if they have 3 incredible results in 3 different locations, I start thinking, holy shit, something's happening here. There is obviously something that can replicate. The problem for Vitality is that meltdowns have happened repeatedly in 3 different locations now. So even if I am the biggest fan and the most biased guy out there, there's no way for me to just say, this was a one-time off. Don't worry about it. You know, this 0-3 versus Mouse in Pro League, don't you worry about it. You know, Mouse are studio professionals. This had nothing to do with Vitality. We're fine. Oh, wait, hold on a minute. This happened again in Dallas. We lost to, oh no, we actually lost to G2 with a stand-in. And then, oh my God, we got wrecked by Spirit in Copenhagen, which we beat in Dallas. What's going on? And that is my issue. Like, at some point, these games where Vitality looked like shadows on themselves have happened repeatedly with time between them. It's not like just 3 games on day 1 to 3, because you could pack it up as like one package and say, well, this was one failure and we're going to work on it. Time has passed in between with an arguable amount of practice. I know they don't get a whole lot of time to practice that, but still. And I think if this lineup is to stay together, there's going to be some serious work being put into understanding deeply what has happened within the team in these 3 series that I talked about where they lost. Because for me, it's not about losing. It's about the way that you lose these games. Like you can lose an incredible series with a map that is just an apotheosis of Counter-Strike, and then you lose 13-11 at the end, and there's one clutch that doesn't go your way, and then, of course, as a fan, you're going to be disappointed, but the same way Switzerland loses to England at the Euro, I'm like, you know what, fair enough.
Fair enough. It's close.
That was a good game. We'll take it. You know, I'm disappointed as a fan, but I like what you guys put together. It's fine. Like, you know, high five. We're proud of you. I don't think any Vitality fan had that feeling watching them lose to Mouse, to G2, and to a lesser extent, but still to Spirit in Copenhagen. And if we feel that, there's a very high probability they feel that, and they need to address it. We don't need to as fans, because we're not playing. This is not our sort of purview. That's all right. But they as a team, they need to address that. Whether there's a roster change or not, I think this is going to need to be addressed.
Yeah, I got to say as well, Maniac, like you say, when you sort of characterize how their runs go, the other thing that's alarming to me is this. If they just had the meltdown at a random point, Like, by the way, I actually think it's not a meltdown, but I think classically this is what FaZe Clan always does. They nearly always lose a random game in the group stage to just some team. But the joke is if they play the same team in the playoffs, they probably beat them then. And you can tell it's just sort of in their DNA. Like, we're mega vets. Like, sometimes we drop a game essentially when it doesn't matter. But then when the stage comes and all the pressure comes, we love that and we respond to that. Right? That's actually a lot easier to swallow because it's more like, it's just like you just got to avoid it happening at the wrong time. The problem I have with Vitality is they will look so good in a tournament and the meltdown's always the last match. And sometimes that is the final or a semi-final. It's always a playoff match. By the way, there's another thing. This is a team that's pretty much guaranteed to be in playoffs. Like, they have one of the absolute best at clearing the group stage. And as I say, in the group stage, they will spank like a FaZe Clan if they play them. Let's fuck them up at the server. And you'll be like, fuck, this team should win the event. And that's why the hype. That's why, by the way, ZywOo was getting it so badly, guys. Because the narrative always goes, he's going to win the MVP. And in fact, sometimes he's posting like record-breaking numbers. But then the last match like brings it down again. He doesn't win the MVP, or he does and they come second. And it makes people like, oh, fuck, like, it always feels like he got teased. And so I think that the worst part is, like, yeah, the way they're melting down means every tournament ends on a low. It's not just that you lost, because I'm with you. If you'd have battled, it's actually why I was always a fan of FaZe. Bro, I've seen FaZe lose tournaments, but it's like, that was a great fucking game. I tell you what, it's almost a privilege to even play a match like that. It was back and forth, both teams could win. Yeah, we lost. You just hope it doesn't become a pattern, like you say. Like, you can lose this one if you win the next one. The problem with Vitality is, not only is a pattern, but you can tell a lot of this is psychological, bro. Like, these players, I know it's why I was able to tell. I just did an interview with them recently. I actually, literally, after that PGL Copenhagen Major, Maniac, the second that Mouse lost, the first person I DM'd was Exertion. I just told him, bro, you know that wasn't you. Like, you're a way better player than that. Something happened. You choked, something got to you, but like, basically go away and figure it out, because you and I know that you're a way better player than that. And if I just look with the eyes, that didn't look like you. That looked like someone else in the server. That's how I feel about some of those Vitality players. Like, I know. It's why when people do the whole thing of like, are you going too hard on Spinks? Listen to the thing. I don't think you actually do go too hard on Spinks. I just think what you do sometimes is, I'll give you the joke. So at this Euros, right, every time Ronaldo does badly, all the Messi fans are like, see, you shit, I told you shit. Because what they're doing, they're not saying Messi's playing better, because Messi himself sort of washed as well at this point in his career. They just focus on that. So I just think, if a Maniac, my joke obviously goes, if ZywOo does badly, but then Spinks also does badly, it's like, I'll get to you in a minute, ZywOo. Spinks, what are you doing? Yeah, there's a bit of that. We all have our favourites, Maniac. It's just the way the game works.
I'm definitely not perfect, and I'm not above these biases. I try not to do that.
But I'll give you this. If I think of the Spinks I've watched all the POVs of in random games where he's carrying, that player very rarely is in these finals when they lose. Like, I sometimes wouldn't recognise him, if I saw like some of the fights he's not taking or losing. Yeah, that would blow.
And I can see it too.
So I do worry about that. And I'll shade in one last thing. This is why, if it's true that Vitality is the team before and after FaZe that wanted Twistzz, I think I get it, Maniac. Because if I had to guess, the main thing I think their team lacks isn't firepower, isn't a specific role. Like, I don't even hit on Messi personally. I think the most obvious thing, you hinted at it earlier, is, bro, can we get a secondary caller for Apex? Can we get someone who wants to do that role but's also really good? Because I feel like that's what could take this team over the top. By the way, it might even mean, if we, depending on who we replace, maybe we get a worse player, but they add this element to the team and it opens us up a bit. Because even though I actually think, if you look role for role, this is probably what Spinks should be doing if he's going to be in some of the spots he's in. But I think I'm speculating here, but I don't get the sense that's who he is as a person. I don't think he's that sort of I think he's more of a crosshair, shoot him in the head type guy. You know what I mean?
And the problem with that, I agree with you. I think you're right. And the problem is twofold. One is obviously when he's having a good game, then it's easy to compensate for that.
He's a monster,
because he might not exactly give you a truck ton of initiatives and whatever, but whoever's going to walk into his crosshair, he's going to get a multi-kill out of it. It's going to be great. And we've always seen some of these like group stage games where he farms the shit out of his opponents, and you just clap your hand and say, "Yep, well that's it. You know what? Top 5 player in the world." The problem with that is when Vitality is having a hard game, it's not okay. So the way I look at it is, there's two different ways you can come back into a game where you're suffering. One is through sheer individual brilliance, and that's what I would call an incredible multi-kill or a 1v3 that's coming out of nowhere.
Okay.
And this gives you like a fire right back up. Like, oh my God, this 1v3 was crazy. Okay, come on guys, high five, let's do it. That can happen too. But one way you can actually work your way back into a game is with initiatives and ideas and like the right mindset, and say, oh, come on guys, this is what we got to do. Let's not lose track of what we need to do. Let's keep an eye on the timings. Let's stay focused, level-headed. this is what a second caller will give you more consistently.
Yeah.
And not just a guy that can pop off. Because if you have a very reliable second caller, which is what I would imagine Magisk was doing more, even if the numbers weren't to the very top, but you would have this consistent voice of reason that will tell you, you know what, guys, it's all right. We're 1-7 down, but hey, this is what we got to do next round. Remember, 50-second, flash me out. I'm going to find them. You can work your way back into the game. Vitality doesn't have that seemingly right now. I'll go even one step further. I don't think ZywOo can do that. I think ZywOo can do it on an individual level. I think individually, if the gods of Counter-Strike align and he is in the right place at the right time, he will 4K you out of a round, and then suddenly Vitality is back, and then they have an eco round to play, and they're back. He can do that. He's got the individual power to do it. I don't think ZywOo is the guy that's going to say, well, listen, guys, this is what's going to happen the next round. I've understood the situation. 20 seconds, you're going to flash me. No. He's going to be in a position, and if they challenge him, they're going to fuck them up, and they're going to be back. But to your point as well, something that is very pernicious for a team is I'm not exactly sure which concept apply the best. It's either self-fulfilling prophecy or learned helplessness. But the problem is once you start doubting of your own ability to come back into game, this is irremediably going to affect how you deal with being in a losing position, because you slowly, gradually lose that lucidity, that serenity that you need.
It's when
that
thought comes through your head. It goes, oh no, not this
Oh, it's
again.
happening
Yeah,
again.
exactly.
It's happening again. We're down. It's the third map of the final. We're down 0-6. ZywOo has 3 kills. Oh, it's happening again. And then again, self-fulfilling prophecy. You start playing worse. You start either being too passive or you're forcing plays. And then the rounds that you were supposed to win, you actually lose them, which makes you more frustrated, which makes you play worse. Like this is when I say like a team is extremely solid mentally, it's a team that is capable of putting a stop to this, which FaZe was famously for the longest time. Like they were capable of just stopping the hemorrhaging, like just a band-aid immediately, like a tourniquet, and they would be like, you know what, let's stop this shit. This is how we play Counter-Strike. We're back into this. Vitality doesn't do that. Like the last 3 games that I mentioned, they haven't done that. Like once the bleeding starts, they bleed out. Like that is it. There's no medic to come and save them. And that worries me a little bit.
I've got one last topic for you, Maniac, and I think you will enjoy this because, as I am always at pains to point out, Maniac is not French. He was not born in France. He doesn't have a French passport. He just speaks French, right? Switzerland actually is quite a different country. I hope people understand that by now. But he obviously has an eye on the French scene that we who aren't French don't have. And he has connections and obviously actually a love for the French scene that a lot of people maybe don't have in the same way. So I actually thought a topic I could bring up because it ties into what I've actually heard from so many people culturally about the French is I'll give you an example. When I was talking to, I think it's actually, by the way, he won't mind me telling this story. I think it was actually one time years and years ago, I once talked to Semler's dad. I think it was Semler's dad I talked to. And like on the phone, like I was at an event or something, and Semler's said something like, oh, like my dad wants to talk to you. Because like, this will sound weird, right? I'm not going to say who the other people are, but this will sound weird. But when people's parents watch CS, because they don't understand the game, a lot of them actually were fans of me on the desk, believe it or not, because they were like, yeah, I like that guy. Who's that guy like saying all the funny shit and like talking trash and like, you know, kind of has a big personality. And obviously they're adults, so they get that. It's like, he's not hating on, like, not like little kids do on forums, you know. So oftentimes a lot of them would actually just almost feel like they knew me from watching me on the events to watch their son be, you know, a commentator or host or whatever. And one of the things his dad said to me is he said something like, what do you think of like, something like, what do you think of like, you know, like Shocks or something at the moment, or something like that, some like French player. And I said this thing of like, well, the problem is he's one of those players where I always worry about him because if you get to know him, he is like, he himself knows he's a mercurial talent. He knows he's not the guy who's ever going to be the hardest worker. He's never going to be the guy like nerding out, studying everything like Rops or fucking Odyssey. He is a guy who very much, if you ever, he put it this way, he talks as though CS is art, not science. Like there's not like a protocol you follow. It's why every Shocks interview, I always used to make fun of it, but in like a loving way, where everything would always be like, my emotion was not at the right level. I was not feelings again. And like everything he's saying is like, that's who he is as a player, really. Like he's actually being honest with you there, guys. He's not waxing lyrical and just making shit sound cool. He really does see the game as it's about like how you're feeling and what you're thinking about the game and how confident you are and do you believe you can win and do you like playing with this teammate and all these things that actually, to me, I would say are sort of somewhat intangibles. They're not things you can nail down and measure as a metric, and it's hard to know how to fix problems that are. The reason I bring this up is because what Semler's dad told me, that was amazing because he's obviously older, is he said, oh, that's basically the problem of French sports. And he told me about this guy where, if people don't know, there was a player who played in the NBA whose surname was Noah, who was like a really good, like grimy player. He played for the Chicago Bulls, if people know him, right? And he said, oh, he's actually the son of a famous French tennis player called Yannick Noah, who won the French Open. And he said, but the problem with this guy was, unlike his son, who was like hardworking and grinding, he was living in America basically. He was almost like wasn't that French at that point in time. He said the problem with the Yannick Noah guy was he was like a guy who everyone knew had a lot of talent, but when he won the French Open, which obviously the tournament to win as like a French player, he said at that point he had everything. He had the women, he had the fucking parties, he had the drugs. He had at that point he sort of just chilled because it was like, I've done it. I'm here. I'm the best. I can sort of have like. By the way, you can see why I tie this to the Shocks example. It's like the same story, right? It's like it's the idea that you're not the guy who does like the simple approach. You grind yourself to oblivion and see if you can be the greatest. The reason I bring this up, right, is because I have a different angle I want to bring up for you, which is there was an interview done recently. It was published on HLTV. It was done by Moses with ZywOo.
Yeah, I watched it.
And in it, ZywOo said a couple of lines, which I'm not overreacting to. Obviously, I know it's not his first language, but they just went a tiny bit concerning along these lines. So one was that he did do the classic one. I've told everyone the story that Device told me back in the day, which is I went to Device and I was like, bro, you should basically be the best player in the world. In fact, you could win all these majors. Like, you've got to fix out whatever's happening to you in these big matches. That's what's holding you back. And because at the time, he was someone who maybe didn't have the confidence, he would always tell me, I'm not supposed to be the star. Like, I've got Dupree and Cage and B. Like, these are all really good players. Like, our team isn't like that. You know, it's just a lot of the sort of framing how ZywOo talks about vitality. It's like, you know, we're all just a team. We win together, we lose, which is great if you're the other players. If you're the star, you have to sort of know you're Cristiano Ronaldo. You know what I mean? You have to know that, like, fucking Pepe can't do what you can do in your role. Like, you're the one who's here to score the goals, bro. Like, you know, sometimes don't pass. Maybe you should take that shot. And that mixed with, this is what killed me. I'll read the quote out, Maniac. He said that he doesn't watch demos to prepare. And the way he said it killed me inside, bro, because he put, I'm watching the game while I'm playing, and I see things instantly, but I'm never rewatching it. Once I've seen it once, I don't need to see it twice. Now, my problem with that, Maniac, is if he was winning all these majors and he was like, had like the fucking Device resume, then I'd actually have to go the other way and go, hey, a bit like when Shocks was at his peak. I used to say when Shocks was the number one player in the world, I would always go like, I find it hard to critique him if I hear he has bad work ethic or he parties, because maybe he just knows the balance for him. Maybe he knows that, like, maybe actually it would go the other way. Maybe if he grinded, he'd lose his love for the game and it'd make him not as good a player. Or maybe Maniac even, I've heard this with Fur from the old LG, maybe actually having too much of the science approach and scouting the opponent would throw him off. Maybe he wants to play off feel and he just knows where they're going to be, and he's a savant like that. Some people are just geniuses, right? The problem here is, Maniac, in light of what we just discussed, if you're having problems where you're having meltdowns and you're failing and you're getting, like you say, you're getting into that match where you're not hitting every shot and you've got to figure out another way to play, bro, that's where those few extra hours in those demos could have they could have really reaped dividends. That could have been the way out. It's just a bit alarming to me, because here's the difference. With Simple, the only thing I'm aware that ever held him back was ego. It was like bad attitude to teammates. You could never, ever, I'm telling you, say this guy didn't grind. He might have put in the most hours ever. Like, Morrissey's up there, but this guy put in 1 billion hours in CS. And in fact, it's true. When he would come second, he would do a get right and go back and just start grinding again and go, I'm going to do the scientific approach to max every metric out. And hopefully, eventually that means ... I win the major, right? And it eventually did. You can't critique that because he's doing everything. The problem is, I feel like even though ZywOo's saying it, I totally understood what he meant, but I think he's opened himself for criticism here. What do you think? What did you think when you heard that?
So the reality is, I haven't learned anything I didn't already know from that.
Sure.
No, but I knew. Like, I've always known who he was. Like, I've always known who he was, how he worked as a player, what was his modus operandi, and I've always been painfully aware of some of the key differences or key improvements, and I will use that term with humility, but some of the key improvements that could be made to the ZywOo project in order for him to have like the extra 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% for him to become untouchable in his own category. And I have two problems with this. The first one is, we have no guarantee that if he was doing all of the things that we just mentioned, we have no guarantee that he would actually be incredibly better.
That's true. Yes, that is true.
It is a hypothesis. As you said, for some people, it just doesn't work out. Some people get confused.
Could even ruin it.
Heads.
Could ruin his game.
It could ruin yourself. So we don't have a guarantee that would be, but I think it's fair enough. I think it's fair enough to open the door and to have the curiosity about it. But the other side of it, the other way I've always looked at it, is that the reason why ZywOo, in my mind, will always be one of the 1, 2, or 3 best players in the world for as long as he plays Counter-Strike is specifically because he's been doing it for 6 years exactly the way he organically wants to do
He's
it.
got a process then, yeah.
Exactly. And this is why I have never thought that, and actually I think I even made that tweet like a few years back where I said ZywOo active is never going to be below the top 5 on HLTV. And I actually have said top 3, but I said top 5 a bit slightly safer on.
You've been
on
a bit
the safe side of the
conservative
road.
back then. You hadn't spiced it up a bit on the desk,
Cautious,
sure. Okay.
Exactly. So that's the reason why. And I'm trying to think, could I eat my cake and have it too? Like, because I think the reason why he's got this incredible consistency, because again, you have to realize if it is statistics true that map number 3 of all of these important series, he drops off, but then the end result in terms of rating is still as high as he's still in contention with Duncan and Maniac and all. This indirectly tells you how consistent and how high the numbers are all the time.
Sure, yeah.
So the problem that I have is, could I ask from him this incredible consistency, which I think can only come from having a process that is organically working for you, so the years can pass and your motivation remain unwavering? Because you got to realize the people he played with throughout the Vitality stint, like he's had to deal with like my lovely RPK who was catching up with the game.
Sure.
He played with Mizuta, he played with Kyojin. Like it's not like he was always just surrounded by top players out there. So because throughout all of these years, he basically played Counter-Strike the way he wants to play Counter-Strike, and I seriously think that he might just be a genius in the sense of he doesn't approach the game the way I do it. Like if I try to put myself in his mind throughout a game, I am going to fail invariably to know what it is he's feeling and to know what it is he's seeing. I'm going to fail that. I don't think I'm capable of it. I can attempt, but I don't think I can. So could I hope for this consistency out of him and also ask for the top 5% on top of that? Or would I break him the way you would break a Swiss Rolex watch if you added another little whatever screw down there that isn't supposed to be here? That is my issue. I haven't solved that equation. What I was hoping for is that it would gradually come. Like he would gradually become a little like extra tooth, like extra arrogant, extra willing.
Yes.
And I haven't completely given up on it. But you got to realize the reason why he is so consistent and so strong throughout the years is because he found a way inherently adequate for him to approach Counter-Strike. And sure, we would like him to be a little bit different. We would like him to be a little bit more like Simple. But there's no guarantee ZywOo would be ZywOo if he was a little bit more like Simple. There's no guarantee.
No, of course not. By the way, it's also why, if you notice, I shaded in, like, I think this is also like a cultural difference. I mean, in the same way as I've often pointed this out, as many great teams as Denmark has had, they don't produce as many superstars. There's a reason why they don't have the best player in the world typically, because aside from Device, most years it was people fitting a role, and a bit like how Germans play football. It's not about one. You don't have a Ronaldo. You play off the system, and you have everyone in their right role, and they're all equally doing the right amount of the job. What I would ask you is this, though. It's a hard question, but I thought it was a cool one to end on. Why is this sort of a thing in French scene, though? Because even just in Counter-Strike, Maniac, you think of the greatest players. Kenny S. Kenny S is notorious for having times where I used to tell people, the reason you guys actually think I overrate Kenny S is you don't realise, even you would vote him now 8th best player in the world. But I know he doesn't even fucking practice. He just plays the scrim in the official game, and he's just off with like his girlfriend or playing FIFA or something. Like he's not doing any FPL hours. Like it actually shows he's really cracked out. Socks is obviously a classic one because he used to have waves of motivation, sometimes based on team. By the way, it's why in a weird way, I now sort of get the Smiths thing. That was actually Shock sort of telling you, this is something I need to feel like I want to play the game. I want my mate with me. I want this guy I understand. I even play off him. We talk about the game. We're best friends. Like to him, that's like a different reason. As to me, I'm like, make it like Dynasty. I'll take him out, put a better piece in. But like Shocks is basically telling me the intangibles is what I want from that guy. So why do you think it is? Why are the superstar French players who all, by the way, I think all these names for real had chances to be like the greatest CS player ever. I think the talent is so incredible. Why do they all have this tendency to not be the grinders? What do you think it is? Do you have a sense for this?
I think it's complicated to give you like a comprehensive answer because I think historically we're looking at different contexts, right? The ZywOo nowadays is evolving in a Counter-Strike that is miles and miles more serious and rigorous than it was in the Kenny S and the Shots time. I think maybe some of it might have sort of come out the roots of France's success in Counter-Strike and like an inherent sort of idea that we know what the hell we're doing.
Right.
And we as in French Counter-Strike, because Very Games was winning so much and then Titan was winning,
that's fair.
Barring NIP. So there might have been contextual parameters that impaired these players like Kenny S and Shock's ability to say, well, hold on a minute. Like I'm not doing as much as I could. Why is that? I think we might have been stuck in like an echo chamber for a while where we were certain that, hey, you know what, actually we were winning for so long and this is how we were winning. So surely this is fine. And we're going to stick to that. This has happened to different players in different areas. Yeah, exactly. Now for ZywOo, I do think that the comparison doesn't work out because I don't want to put these two in the same, or these two. I don't want to put the Shucks and Kenny category on par with ZywOo because the level of success and accomplishment is miles ahead.
Right.
Like ZywOo is now going towards his 6th year as a number 1 or number 2, maybe number 3 best players in the world. Like he is literally accomplishing what he is supposed to accomplish, barring the major in Cologne and Katowice. But like his level of success is way past whatever Shucks or Kenyas have been able to do individually speaking. I think the major record is still something that is staining his resume, rightfully so. So I wouldn't put them in the same category because I think for ZywOo, he probably already is doing, even if it isn't exactly what we from an external standpoint would want to see, he probably already is doing whatever works best for him to get the best out of him. And maybe this is the best that we're going to get from ZywOo. Like I have to be at peace with the idea that this might just be the best that I'm going to get out of ZywOo. Because it's been 6 years now that he's at the very top level. I don't know how much more I'm going to see from him. Like how probable is it that he's going to transform and make it to a next step when it's been now 6 years that he's already sort of at the very top? Maybe I just have to be at peace with who he is and how he plays and the pluses and the minuses. And then sure, I can do some like cognitive dissonance here and there and just hate on Spinks because it makes my life feel better. But at the end of the day,
at least you're aware of it.
Oh, I'm painfully aware of myself. I know how I work.
Sure.
I always try to be aware of it. And also, I absolutely do not hate Spinks.
No. By the way, I'm obviously exaggerating that for effect. Like, if people don't know, this is also something on the desk where everyone eventually gets each other's rhythms down. The joke back in the day was one of the reasons why me and Richard are the ultimate duo. It's because Richard wouldn't even know when there's like some shit he should set me up on to rant about that. He's going to purposely like fuck with me and say, so why is KD actually the best IG? And then I'm going to go off on a rant. He knows my idiosyncrasies, of course.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the same for me. So now I just have to come to peace with the fact that whatever imaginary version of a fully accomplished ZywOo I have in my mind might just never come to fruition. And he pretty much is close to the best version of whoever he is going to be. And now just imagine if you replicate, and that's a big if, you replicate the 6 years that have happened now for ZywOo, and you basically copy paste them into the 6 years in the future. And you're going to tell me he's going to be number 1 or 2 for 6 years, for 12 years long in Counter-Strike?
We'll check that.
Like nobody ever
accept
did
that
anything
immediately.
like that.
Yeah,
exactly. Nobody ever did that.
Yeah.
So do I want to trade this extra 2 or 3% because I selfishly would like him to lift more trophies right now, or do I just have to accept that he found a way to go about the game that is going to allow him to remain at 99.9% for a decade if he needs to? First of all, it isn't my life. It isn't my fucking career. It's his life. People do that. People always do that. They live their lives through their idols, and they get mad at their idols because they're not fulfilling the dreams that they have. This isn't my life.
Yes,
it's his life. And if he is at peace with where he is now, not rewatching his demos and playing some Face It here and there and being the best or the second best player in the world for 6 years, then who the fuck am I to tell him he shouldn't do that? Like this is us. We do that. We project that, and I try to be aware of it.
I know what you mean.
More honest conversation.
Like, put it this way, I do think a flaw in the framing of this topic is we are acting like it is like FIFA and there's a rating that goes up to 100, and if he just does X and Y and Z, every rating will get to 100. I actually think, by the way, in some ways, I often say this about other sports, like I often say Michael Jordan ruined the NBA because they made everyone think the best player has to be like Michael Jordan, basically that exact type of player who wins in that way and is always clutching that way, whereas there's a multitude of styles of player, even great players. So I do think in some ways Simple ruined it for everyone in that sense, because he's not just the big fragger and the number one player, but then he essentially, if you are the fan living vicariously through your favourite player, he plays the selfish way we all wish we could. Like, you know, when people ask that question of players, like, what skill would you take? The joke is, if I had Simple skills, I'd play exactly the way Simple does. Like, I would play like I had the biggest balls in the world and go for every 1v3 and tell all my teammates, give me that fucking gun and shut the fuck up. Of course you would. That's what we all dream of. But actually, that's a very extreme personality type. And by the way, usually that doesn't even always align with being the best player. Like, actually, ZywOo he already's had an incredible career. I'm also with you, by the way. The underrated part of his career, because actually, Simple didn't even get to do this because of the whole war situation. The fact he stopped playing the game is he's the only player ever now that really could do like 8-9 years as the true elite contender. Like, look, maybe Simple could have done it. We'll never know now. Yeah, he took himself off the chessboard, as it were. So he himself had done an incredible streak. He'd had himself for 4 or 5 years where he was at absolute peak. But I agree with you as well. There's also like other ways to be successful. Like, it doesn't always have. And I'll throw this in finally as well, which is this is why. Maybe in the end, ZywOo's career might be more of a device career than a Simple career. Maybe the move is, like I said, if he has certain games where he just has drop-offs, so there's certain times where the pressure gets to him, then maybe if he had his equivalent of a Zipnix who wins all the clutches, or some sort, again, like a Perfecto, maybe if he had one of these types of players that shores it up, maybe you get to win without being the best. Because remember, when Device won all those tournaments, there's the reason we all still said Simple was number one. It's not a problem. So it also depends, what does he care about? Does he want to win? Does he want to be number one himself? If you notice, the real message I'm getting from these interviews is this, Maniac, and it's a way less cynical message. It's just that he's sort of trying to tell you guys that he clearly does want to win and he wants to be the best he can be, but he's going to do it his way, and he isn't trying to be Simple, and he's not trying to be number one in the traditional sense. He's not trying to just have only the greatest stats ever. Like, he's doing it his own way. He's doing it the ZywOo way, right?